As I stepped onto the church steps on the day of my son Lucas's wedding, he raised his hand and stopped me in front of hundreds of people. "You're not invited. You're no longer my family." I froze, the whispers around me stabbing into my skin like tiny needles. But instead of crying, I smiled. I tilted my head and replied softly, "All right, sweetheart. But before I go, remember to check your phone." I turned away, and no one knew that what was inside his phone would destroy the entire wedding. And no one knew that I, a mother cast aside, had set a trap long ago. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I walked down the cold stone steps of St. Augustine Church, my hands trembling slightly because the Portland breeze in May still carried a chill. I heard the church door close behind me, the sound of its hinges slicing slowly into my heart. I forced my steps to stay steady, my back straight, my chin lifted as if nothing had happened. But every step was an open wound. People passing by looked at me with a mix of pity and curiosity, and all I wanted was to leave before everything collapsed in their eyes. I, Eleanor Harrington, 66 years old, never imagined the day would come when my only son rejected me at the threshold of one of the most important days of his life. I had spent half my lifetime raising and sacrificing for Lucas Harrington. From the moment he lay in that tiny newborn room, to the day I dropped him off at college, to the day he moved out to start his adult life, I was always there. I always stood behind him. Yet today, that very child pulled the string that held my heart together and let it fall to the ground. Inside the church, the ceremony continued without me. I could hear the choir through the thick brick walls. That melody was something I once thought I would hear with tears of joy in my eyes. Not like this. Not with a heart encased in the ice that Lucas himself had placed there. I stood beside my car with one hand on the roof, trying to steady the trembling in my body. Not from the cold, not from humiliation, but from the slow, dull agony of feeling a blunt knife carved through my chest. My son believed I was no longer his family, but deep inside, another emotion flickered, a small flame I had been tending for months. Determination, preparation, quiet resistance. I knew what was waiting to explode as soon as Lucas opened the phone tucked inside his vest pocket. I knew that moment would come. And I knew that when it did, his life and mine would split into two completely different paths. But before I tell you about that moment, I need to go back. I want you to understand where everything began, because no one in that church knew that once I had a family so happy it felt unbreakable, until it shattered. It all began 3 years ago, during the last autumn when I was still able to hold my husband's hand, Richard Harrington. He was tall, warm, with eyes that always smiled when they looked at me. Our small house on the outskirts of Portland was never luxurious, but it was always filled with laughter, the smell of fresh apple pie, and the sound of Lucas dribbling a basketball in the driveway. When Richard received the diagnosis, late-stage pancreatic cancer, it felt like the air was torn from my lungs. He had 6 months for me to cook his favorite meals, 6 months for him to hold Lucas a little longer each time they said goodbye, 6 months to arrange everything he would never see once he was gone. I once thought the cruelest thing in my life was watching the man I loved fade a little more each day, but I was wrong. The cruelest thing was realizing that his death didn't just take my husband, it pulled apart the bond between me and my son. In his final days, Richard held my hand tightly, his voice weak but clear. "Eleanor, promise me something. Tell me, Richard. Keep our financial assets a secret until Lucas is truly mature enough to handle them. He has a good heart, but he's too easily influenced." I nodded, tears falling onto his hand. "It all belongs to him. But don't tell him early. Only when you believe he's strong enough, then you tell him." The assets Richard referred to weren't a few valuable items. They were his investment portfolios, the manufacturing company he co-founded, and the savings he quietly built over 40 years of work. Richard wanted Lucas to be responsible before learning the truth. I promised, and I kept my word. Richard passed on a cold October morning. Lucas cried like a 5-year-old child, even though he was 29 at the time. I held my son close, hurting for him and for myself. I thought that after Richard's death, Lucas and I would become closer, but life doesn't follow our hopes. A year after Richard passed, Lucas began to find his footing again. I stayed by his side, cooking breakfast whenever he stopped by, helping him fix up his new apartment, listening to him talk about his job. I believed we were building a new kind of happiness, quieter, steadier. Then one day, Lucas came to my house with a young woman. Her name was Vanessa Hale. I remember that moment vividly, the moment my life took a sudden turn. Vanessa walked into my home as if she were stepping into a place she expected to own one day. Her dress hugged her body, her heels clicked sharply, and her eyes swept across the room as if she were appraising everything in sight. When Lucas introduced us, Vanessa smiled beautifully, but the smile never reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile I had seen many times in my life. A smile from someone who always wanted more than what they had. I was never a suspicious person. I had always believed in people's goodness. But from the very first day, Vanessa unsettled me. The way she asked about Richard's career, about the factory, about our savings, everything was too subtle to be accidental. Lucas, on the other hand, adored her. She seemed like the first light he'd seen since his father's passing. He laughed more, stood taller, worked harder. Love brought him back to life, but it also blinded him. I wanted to be happy for him. I wanted to believe Vanessa loved him sincerely, but every sly comment, every probing glance, every time she reached into parts of my home she didn't belong, made me uneasy. None of us want to admit that someone might approach our child for reasons other than love, but a mother's intuition, especially a mother my age, is rarely wrong. I didn't yet know that the day Lucas brought Vanessa into my home was the day I began losing my son. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. But that is the story of the chapters that follow. For now, standing outside the church with the fading afternoon stretched beneath my feet, I understood one thing. The moment Lucas stopped me at the doors was not the first time I lost him. The first time was the day he brought Vanessa Hale into our home. From the day Lucas brought Vanessa into my house, the air inside every room seemed to change. Gone was the peaceful quiet of a woman living alone, and gone was the lingering warmth of my old family life. Something colder slipped in, like a breeze carrying the scent of a coming storm, and it walked into my house with Vanessa Hale's confident smile. Lucas stood behind her with a brightness in his eyes I hadn't seen since Richard died. It made me want to be happy, to believe this woman would heal him. But when Vanessa reached out to shake my hand, her hand soft and warm, her eyes were cold as a blade pressed to the throat. "I've heard you're a wonderful cook," she said sweetly. "Lucas tells me so much." I smiled politely, thanked her. But I noticed her gaze never stayed on my face. It moved to the wedding portrait of Richard and me, the antique clock Richard adored, the crystal glass set we bought in Europe decades ago. Her eyes weren't observing. They were assessing. At 66, I had met many types of people. I knew instantly that the look in Vanessa's eyes wasn't that of a woman in love. It was the look of someone calculating. Lucas didn't see it. He never would. During dinner, Vanessa sat across from me, legs crossed, shoulders tilted as if she were at an interview, but not the interviewee. No, she was evaluating me. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "More than 30 years, I answered. This home was built with so much of my husband's effort. "Ah," Vanessa murmured, her eyes sweeping again. "It's beautiful. Portland is such a great place for real estate investment." Her tone tightened something inside my chest, not because of the words, but because of the voice. It belonged to someone who knew the value of everything in a home she hadn't lived in for even a day. Lucas was too busy smiling, telling stories. He didn't see that Vanessa paid attention only when the topic was money, property, or investments. I wanted to believe my instincts were wrong. I wanted to give her a chance. That changed the night she went down the hallway after dinner. I heard the faint click of a drawer, Richard's filing cabinet. He kept all his business documents there, stock papers, investment accounts, factory contracts. He always locked it. After he died, I continued locking it. That night, I forgot. When I heard the sound, my heart dropped. "Vanessa," I called. "Yes, I was just looking for the bathroom," she answered. She appeared at the corner in 2 seconds, too fast to convince me she had actually been searching for anything except what was inside that cabinet. Her eyes looked innocent, but I didn't buy it. "The bathroom is this way," I said with a smile, pointing in the opposite direction. "Oh, my mistake. Thank you," she said, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. Too dramatic. Too perfect. I glanced at the cabinet after she left. The third drawer was slightly ajar, just enough for someone to peek inside. It felt like someone had laid a filthy hand on my heart. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa slipped deeper into Lucas's life. And Lucas, my sweet, grieving, vulnerable son, fell deeper under her spell. He stopped visiting me. He stopped calling unless she needed something. He stopped seeing me as his home. One evening, as I brewed tea in the kitchen, I heard the cabinet again. I stepped into the hallway and found Vanessa standing there, her hand still on the drawer. "Oh, you scared me," she said, laughing lightly. "I thought Lucas left his jacket here." No one keeps jackets in a file cabinet. I looked at her long enough for her to sense the suspicion radiating off me. She only smiled, and in that smile I saw it clearly. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She was looking, and she had found the folder marked with the logo of Richard Harrington's factory. I could tell by the position of the papers shifted from where I last left them. She turned away, but I stood frozen. Why did she care about those documents? Why did she always appear when my guard was lowest? Why did her eyes brighten only when Lucas spoke about Richard's success? I didn't have proof, only a heaviness in my chest that grew by the day. A mother's instinct, a woman's instinct, the instinct of someone who had lived long enough to recognize greed when it walked straight through her door. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. Vanessa Hale did not come for Lucas's heart, and I knew something else, too. I had never feared another woman's smile the way I feared hers. It was the smile of a gathering storm, and that storm drew closer every day. I still remember clearly the afternoon Lucas came into my house with a brightness in his eyes I hadn't seen for a long time. Not the brightness of a man who is steady and happy. It was the brightness of a boy who has just been reassured that every dream can be bought if he tries a little harder. Lucas sat down in the chair across from me, his hands clenched, his voice trembling despite his attempt to steady it. "Mom, I proposed to Vanessa." Time seemed to stop for a few seconds. 3 months. Only 3 months. From the day Vanessa appeared in his life, I had been losing my son, little by little. But hearing he had proposed felt like someone had just pulled the rug out from under me, leaving me swaying without warning. I looked at my son. I wanted to ask a dozen questions. Have you thought this through? Do you understand what you're doing? Do you see what I see? But I also understood that one wrong word, one tone he didn't like, could make me lose my only child forever. "I'm happy for you," I whispered, even as my heart tightened in pain. "As long as you're happy." Lucas smiled faintly, but the smile faded quickly, as if he was about to say something that even he wasn't comfortable with. "Vanessa wants a big wedding. A really big one," Lucas said quietly. "She says it's the most important day of my life." Right away, I knew where this was going. Well, Vanessa hopes you can help cover part of the cost, just to make the ceremony perfect. I kept my composure. "Lucas, how much are we talking about?" He swallowed. "About $28,000. $28,000. The number dropped between us like a heavy stone. I knew my family had resources, but I had lived frugally and privately for years. What Richard left behind was not something I handed out to buy anyone's approval, but Lucas's eyes at that moment, both pleading and anxious, made it impossible for me to refuse. He was torn between me and Vanessa, and clearly Vanessa knew exactly how to make him feel guilty if he didn't provide for her. "Of course, I'll help," I said, and so I transferred the money, not because I wanted a lavish ceremony, but because I was afraid of losing more of my son. I thought that was it. I thought I had paid for a bit of fragile peace, but people like Vanessa don't know what enough means. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed close to 9 p.m. A message from Vanessa. "Ms. Eleanor, we need to talk. There are some important additional costs. Could we speak?" I sighed but called her back. She answered immediately. "Ms. Harrington," Vanessa said with a gentle laugh, her voice sweeter than honey, "I'm really grateful for your support, but I just reviewed things with the event coordinator and the price has increased. I need another $20,000 to keep everything as planned." I tightened my grip on the table. "Another $20,000? Vanessa, that's a lot of money." "Oh, I understand." Her tone instantly shifted to something sympathetic. "But Lucas really wants everything perfect, and I don't want him to be disappointed. No mother would want her son upset on his big day, right?" That sentence was a knife, small but sharp enough to make me close my eyes. I heard the calculation in every syllable, not a hint of hesitation, not a drop of shame. "Let me think," I said. "Yes, of course, take your time," Vanessa replied, then added one last line. "But the vendor only holds the reservation until tomorrow morning. If we lose it, we'll have to downgrade. And you know Lucas wouldn't want that." I understood clearly. That wasn't information. It was a threat wrapped in time pressure. After the call ended, I sat for a long time without moving. I looked at Richard's photo on the shelf. He was smiling gently as always, but I could almost hear him ask, "What are you doing, Eleanor? Who are you letting steer your life?" But I still transferred another $20,000. For Lucas. Only for Lucas. After that day, Vanessa's invisible power over my son became unmistakable. Lucas no longer made decisions on his own. Every answer, every opinion seemed filtered through Vanessa's expression, her glance before he spoke. If I asked Lucas something simple like, "Are you sure?" he immediately stiffened, looking toward Vanessa like a child afraid of getting something wrong. "Mom, Vanessa thinks this makes more sense," he said with an awkward smile. Vanessa didn't need to say much. A hand on Lucas's shoulder or a faint smile from her was enough for my son to take her side instantly. I began to see the changes clearly, not sudden but layered, thin as frost accumulating after a long night. Lucas grew more defensive, more irritable, and began treating my concerns as interrogations. I knew I was losing him, piece by piece, and I also knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. From the night Vanessa demanded another $20,000, I began recording everything: dates, amounts, reasons, contacts, receipts she sent, even her voice messages. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but instinct told me that someday I would need all of this, not to protect myself, but to save my son from the woman he believed was the love of his life. On the quiet nights in my big, empty house, I sat at the kitchen table organizing every invoice. Sometimes my breath trembled with anger and helplessness. I had lived long enough to recognize what being used felt like, and every piece of Vanessa, her eyes, her smile, her voice, made that feeling stronger by the day. Sometimes I wondered whether I was judging too harshly. Maybe Vanessa was simply a young woman who liked luxury. But each time I saw her, the truth rose to the surface like white foam on water. She didn't love Lucas. She loved what Lucas could offer her. But what hurt me most was that Lucas didn't see it. My son, the child I held in my arms, the boy I comforted when he feared the dark, the young man I embraced when Richard died, was being led by someone who had no good intentions whatsoever. One evening, while I sat at the dining table looking at yet another invoice Vanessa sent, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe this was just the beginning, just the first door in a long corridor Vanessa had planned from the start. I set the paper down and closed my eyes. I knew deep in my heart that the thing I feared most had not yet arrived. And indeed, I had no idea that what I had just endured was only the opening act of a far more intricate scheme, one that would pull both me and my son into a storm we would never forget. After I transferred that additional $20,000, things between Lucas and me changed noticeably, but not in the way I once hoped. The mother and son closeness that had been natural and warm began to feel strained, careful, as if an unseen third person stood behind every conversation, pulling strings. And I knew who that person was. Lucas visited far less often, from coming every weekend to once every 2 weeks, then once a month, then so rarely that I had to mentally count how long it had been since we last ate together. I wanted to ask, to reach out, to draw him back in. But each time I opened my mouth, I heard Vanessa's voice in my head, sweet but sharp as a needle. What mother would bother her son when he's building his future? And so I stayed silent. One Saturday afternoon, I called Lucas to ask if he wanted to come for dinner. I had made rosemary roasted chicken, his favorite since childhood. Lucas answered, but his voice sounded distant, as if filtered through something cold. "Mom, Vanessa isn't feeling well tonight. I think I should stay home with her." "Vanessa isn't well? Then let me stop by." "No need, Mom," Lucas cut in quickly. "Vanessa doesn't want anyone over when she's resting. You understand?" No, I didn't understand. but I still said, "All right, maybe another day." I set the phone down and looked at the roasted chicken steaming on the counter, the meal I had made for him so many times, the dish he once said was the best thing I cooked. Now it was just a tray of food for one, someone being slowly pushed out of her son's life. Other times weren't any better. Lucas canceled plans, or showed up late, or left early because Vanessa needed him. I started seeing the pattern clearly. Every time Lucas tried to spend time with me, Vanessa suddenly had an urgent matter. One evening, I tried stopping by their place. I didn't want to intrude. I just wanted to see if Lucas was okay. Vanessa opened the door with a flawless face of makeup and eyes that were ice cold. "Miss Eleanor," she said slowly, "you came without letting us know." "I wanted to bring Lucas some fresh-baked bread." "Yes, but you understand, don't you? Newlyweds need private time." She said it with a smile, but the coldness was unmistakable. "I can come in for just a minute." "It's really not a good time," Vanessa insisted, cutting me off. "Next time, just message first. We're very busy." Message first to enter my son's home? I stood there for a few seconds, gripping the tray tightly to keep calm. The door closed the moment I stepped back, like I was a stranger who had knocked on the wrong house. Walking down the stairs, my throat tightened. The bread in the tray was still warm, but my heart felt frozen. Another day, I learned something that still stings even now. A neighbor's daughter accidentally sent me a screenshot from Instagram stories, a small family gathering at Lucas and Vanessa's home. I saw Lucas, Vanessa, her mother, her relatives, everyone smiling, toasting, and in the corner, the group chat name appeared. Hale Family Circle, the Hale family. I zoomed in. There were 30 unread messages, and at the top was a small line of text. Lucas Harrington added by Vanessa, their family, and me? I, the woman who raised Lucas from infancy, who held his hand on his first day of school, who comforted him when Richard died, wasn't included in his life online or offline, not added, not mentioned, erased. I began noticing that the phrases Lucas used weren't his own. "I need to focus on my new family, Mom." "Vanessa says I need to prioritize correctly. I can't keep working around your schedule. A wife is who I should take care of first." I sat across from him as he said these things. I watched the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, just for a second, before his shoulders stiffened, as if he needed to prove something. I knew. I knew those words weren't from my son's heart. They were Vanessa's echoes, her subtle, steady control wrapping around Lucas like a trap. One October evening, I sat in my living room with my phone in hand, waiting for a birthday message from Lucas. No call, no gift, just a few words. That was all I wanted. 10 p.m., 10:15, 11. At 11:48, the screen lit up. "Happy birthday, Mom." Nothing more. No emoji, no sign-off, no call. Just 3 cold words. 3 words typed by someone who felt like a stranger. I set the phone down and felt a hollow ache in my chest. In my 66 years, I don't think I had ever felt so alone. Not because no one was beside me, but because the only person I had left was drifting beyond my reach, and I couldn't pull him back. That night, I cried for the first time in months. Not because I was insulted, but because I realized I had been pushed to the outer edge of my son's life in small, soft, but merciless steps. Vanessa didn't want me to lose Lucas all at once. She wanted me to lose him slowly, quietly, without a trace. But tears also have limits. When a heart no longer has room for pain, patience turns into vigilance. And vigilance, when pushed far enough, turns into determination. I no longer saw Vanessa as simply the woman Lucas loved. I began to see her as someone trying to build an invisible prison around my son and tightening it one ring at a time. I knew I couldn't just stand by and watch, but I didn't know where to start until that night when the house was quiet. I was washing my teacup when my phone vibrated. A message from Vanessa sent directly to me the first time in weeks. I dried my hands and opened it. Only 7 words, but those 7 words sent a chill down my spine, as if someone had thrown open a window and let a storm crash into the room. "We need to talk about your house." I froze in the kitchen, and at that very moment, I fully woke up. There was no doubt left. Vanessa didn't just want to control Lucas, she wanted to take everything Lucas could inherit, everything Richard left to me, and her next step would certainly be me. I set the phone on the table. A flame rose inside me. No more tears, no more waiting, no more telling myself, this will pass. I knew the storm had truly begun, and I also knew, this time, I was no longer afraid. When I read the message Vanessa sent the night before, I knew she wouldn't stop, but I didn't expect the next blow to come so quickly and so ruthlessly that my entire body went cold, like someone had poured a basin of ice water straight into my chest. The next morning, Lucas called me. His voice was excited, trembling, like a child who had just received a scholarship, not a grown man standing at the edge of a storm about to tear his life apart. "Mom, Vanessa has good news." Good news. Those 2 words fell into my ears like lead. She is pregnant. I froze. One hand still held a dish towel, the other gripping the phone so tightly the knuckles turned white. Vanessa, pregnant. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. Not because I was afraid of having a grandchild. I had hoped for one for a long time. But with everything I had seen in Vanessa, her calculating eyes, her subtle control, her sweet words dripping poison one drop at a time, and the web she was spinning around Lucas, I knew instantly this wasn't a miracle. It was a strategy, a chess piece placed in the perfect square. Lucas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, God, I'm gonna be a dad." I swallowed hard. "Congratulations, sweetheart." "Mom, we're coming over tonight. There's something important we want to discuss." Something important. I knew for certain it wouldn't be about baby names. That evening, when the doorbell rang, I had prepared myself, but I didn't expect Vanessa to show up with one hand on her stomach, a stomach that looked exactly the same as a week earlier, and a triumphant smile like she had just reached the final step of her plan. "Miss Eleanor," Vanessa said, her voice filled with deliberate sweetness, "you're going to be a grandmother." Lucas stood beside her, his eyes glowing, as if nothing in the world could compare to that moment. I invited them in. Vanessa didn't wait. She walked straight into the living room as if it had been her house all along. She stroked her stomach again and again, a weak but overly performed gesture, like an amateur actress forcing herself into character. After a few polite questions, Vanessa glanced at Lucas and nodded slightly. A signal. Lucas took a folder out of his bag. He placed it on the table and slid it toward me. "Mom, we've thought this through." "About where the baby will live." Vanessa cut in immediately, her voice soft but her eyes sharp as a knife scraping across the table. "Our 1-bedroom apartment isn't suitable. We're really worried." I didn't say anything. I didn't touch the papers either. Lucas continued. "So, Vanessa suggested a good idea for the whole family." Family. Why did that word sound like an accusation when it came out of his mouth? "Miss Eleanor." Vanessa tilted her head, smiling soft as cotton but with eyes cold as steel. "Your house is too big. You live alone, it's wasteful and tiring. You're getting older. I tightened my hands on my lap. At this stage of life, you should be resting, not cleaning a whole big house. I still stayed silent, and then she placed the real statement on the table like a stone dropped into a still lake. So we think you should transfer the ownership of this house to Lucas. No more hints, no more polite wording, just cold bluntness so shocking I doubted my own hearing. Lucas took a deep breath as if he were doing something noble. For me. For the baby, Mom. Vanessa pushed the stack of papers closer to me with one elegant, commanding finger. You just need to sign here. We prepared all the paperwork. I flipped through the documents quickly, not in detail, but enough to see the horror. No protection for me. No right to stay. No right to use the house. Nothing. If I signed, the house would belong entirely to Lucas, and Vanessa, I knew for certain, would want me out the moment it suited her. Lucas looked at me, and the eyes weren't my son's anymore. They were the eyes of someone trapped in a tunnel, believing he had only one way out. Mom, don't you want to help us? Lucas, I said softly, have you really thought this through? Vanessa let out a small laugh, a pitying laugh, firm as a slap. Ms. Eleanor, don't be selfish. You're old and living in a big house like this. For what? Meanwhile, your son and your future grandchild have to squeeze into a tiny apartment? I looked directly at Vanessa, this time without avoiding. If you truly cared about the baby, you'd want stability, not someone else's property. Vanessa's expression darkened, shifting into something colder. I don't see this as someone else's property. This is a family home, and Lucas is your family, isn't he? I smiled, a smile full of pain but without tears. Family doesn't take from each other. Lucas frowned. Mom, what is that supposed to mean? Vanessa only wants what's best for me and the baby. The baby. He was talking about a child I was certain Vanessa was not carrying. I clenched my hands, then said each word clearly. I will not sign. The living room turned cold as a cellar. Vanessa leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at me as if assessing an opponent. Then you're only making things harder for Lucas. She turned to Lucas, her voice trembling for exactly one perfect beat. Sweetheart, if your mother doesn't care about our family, then I don't know how our baby will live. Lucas immediately panicked, eyes reddening. Vanessa, don't cry. Mom, can't you see we need you? No, I saw everything clearly. I saw Vanessa squeezing Lucas's wrist under the table, lightly but with the force of command. I saw the fear in my son's eyes, not fear of me, but fear of losing Vanessa. I saw that I was facing a plan months in the making, pushing me step by step into surrender. And I saw one painful truth. Lucas was no longer on my side. I inhaled deeply, then stood up. You two should go home. Vanessa shot to her feet, her gaze slicing across me with open hostility, then dragged Lucas toward the door as if pulling a possession behind her. Just before disappearing, Lucas turned back. Mom, why can't you try to understand us? The door slammed shut. I stood still for a long time. Only one thought echoed in my mind. They had planned this for a very long time. From the moment Vanessa first stepped into my home, her eyes scanning the file cabinet, from the moment she began isolating Lucas from me, from the moment she demanded the absurd wedding expenses, and now, right in the middle of my living room, she dared call me selfish in the house my husband left to me. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't hurting anymore. I had only one thing left, the will to survive. I walked straight to my office. My hand trembled slightly as I opened my contacts. I dialed the number I had saved for years, never imagining I'd call it because of my own son. The phone rang once. A deep, familiar voice answered, "Grant Smith speaking." I closed my eyes, taking a long breath. "Grant, I need you. Please. Immediately." And that was the moment I officially stepped into the battle Vanessa thought I would lose from the very first move. But she didn't know one thing. I raised Lucas for more than 30 years. I lived beside Richard, a man of formidable strength, all my life. I was never an easy target, and Vanessa would soon learn that. I had never experienced a morning so long and dense as that one. After speaking with Grant Smith the night before, I hardly slept. I sat in the living room, the curtains shifting slightly with Portland's early winter breeze, my hands gripping a cup of tea that had gone cold without me noticing. My mind kept turning, not from fear, but from a painful clarity. I was dealing with a woman who had no limits, no morals, and no intention of stopping once she chose her target. Around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Grant's investigator, Mr. Walter Briggs, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a warm but sharp voice, stood at my door holding a black document case. "Mrs. Harrington," he said with a small nod, "we've gathered the information you requested." I invited him into the dining room. He placed the case on the table and slid it toward me like one would present crucial evidence in a boardroom. "I need you to brace yourself," Briggs said. "What we found isn't pleasant." I drew a breath. I expected that. But I don't think I had ever expected something so painfully accurate. When he opened the case, the documents were organized by category: finances, relationships, legal history, personal background. I recognized immediately the meticulousness of Briggs's work. No excess detail, no irrelevant line, and the very first line made my blood run cold. Legal name, Vanessa Hale. Influencer profile fabricated. Briggs pushed a stack of color-printed photos toward me. The photos Vanessa posted online: luxury homes, expensive cars, vacations, designer brands, all glamorous on the surface, but he pointed to each one. All of these locations were shot in staged rental units and hourly photo studios, he explained. Most of the handbags and jewelry are rentals. None of it belongs to her. I had suspected it, but I didn't think it would be this empty. Briggs continued. She owes about $95,000 in credit card debt and high-interest private loans. Here's the summary. A long sheet of paper, numbers in bright red, packed with debts from banks, credit companies, and worst of all, 3 loans from private lenders with interest rates bordering on extortion. How can she maintain such a luxurious lifestyle? I asked. Because she doesn't, Briggs replied. She only creates the illusion. He opened the next section: romantic relationships, affair with a gym trainer. I looked at a photo captured from the gym's camera. Vanessa walking arm in arm with a man at least 5 years younger, far more intimate than casual friends. Then pictures of them entering a hotel. The dates matched the time she began dating Lucas. I felt my heart being squeezed hard, not because I was hurt on Lucas's behalf, but because I could see my son was simply one of her financial options to cling to. Briggs pulled out another set of documents. "And this is the most important information," he said slowly. "Vanessa once faked a pregnancy to extort money from a businessman in Seattle. When the truth came out, she disappeared before the man could sue." I stared at him without blinking. "Fake pregnancy," Briggs emphasized. "She has done it before, and she might be doing it again." Not might. I knew for certain. Vanessa was never pregnant. Next, Briggs opened the section labeled Psychological Manipulation. "Do you remember those arguments that seemed to happen by chance between you and Lucas?" he asked. I nodded. "They've been happening more often lately." "Not by chance," Briggs said. "We found messages Vanessa sent to Lucas. She fed him all kinds of ideas, that you were discouraging him, that you were selfish, that you were jealous of his new life." I closed my eyes. Each sentence was a blade reopening wounds that had never healed. "She told Lucas," Briggs continued, "if your mother doesn't support us, that means she doesn't want our family to be happy." I felt my hands tremble, but I set them on the table to steady myself. I knew I had been pushed away from my son, but learning it was a deliberate plan. Made it all even more painful. Briggs flipped to the final page, and here is her actual plan. I read the first line and almost couldn't breathe. Objective: seize ownership of assets by declaring Mrs. Harrington legally incompetent. Briggs explained. She has connections with someone working at a legal consulting office. They are trying to build preliminary documentation, claiming you are forgetful, no longer fully aware, and unfit to manage your own assets. I let out a dry laugh. "Incredible," I whispered. "She wants to have me declared incompetent?" "Yes, and once that happens, Lucas, the legal husband, would be appointed to manage all assets, including the house. She would control everything indirectly." I collapsed back in my chair. 30 years of marriage with Richard, all the keepsakes, all the hard work, all the memories. Vanessa wanted to take everything with one signature and a fabricated file. I inhaled deeply and steadied my voice. "Briggs, I need to know every piece of evidence you gathered." "It's all here," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "Messages, emails, audio recordings, debt papers, photos. We even have video of Vanessa meeting the gym trainer at the same time she told Lucas she was going to a prenatal appointment." Exactly as I suspected. The storm had grown into a full-blown hurricane. But for the first time, I felt I wasn't standing alone in the wind. I had evidence. I had a lawyer. And most importantly, I had the truth on my side. That evening, I sat alone in my office, the desk lamp casting light over the pages spread out before me. I reviewed every piece of evidence, carefully taking notes in a small notebook, a habit Richard had taught me when he managed the factory. Nothing is stronger than a well-organized file. I opened my laptop and created 3 copies of everything, one on the computer, one on an external drive, and one stored in the cloud with 2-step authentication. I did not allow myself a single mistake, not one. While taping together the last set of documents, my phone rang. It was Grant Smith. "Eleanor." His voice calm but serious. "Briggs told me everything. You must be extremely careful. Vanessa is clever in a dangerous way. Your strike must land at the right time, in the right place. Otherwise, she will flip the situation." "I know," I said, "but I'm ready." "There's something important," Grant added. "If you want to break Vanessa's plan, Lucas must see the truth with his own eyes. Someone like Lucas, he doesn't believe stories. He believes what he hears and sees directly." I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then a thought flashed through my mind, sharp as a blade. The phone. Lucas's phone, every call, every message, every whisper she breathed into his ear, every argument they thought I never noticed, every lie. If I could access it, if I could show Lucas exactly what Vanessa said about him, about me, about the assets, it would be a blow she could not defend against. I looked up, my voice calm enough to surprise even myself. "Grant," I said, "I know what I have to do." "Are you sure?" "I'll use Lucas's phone," I replied. and I'll let Vanessa reveal the truth herself. I closed my laptop. The Portland night was pounding rain against the window, each drop like a drum urging me forward. I was no longer the mother pushed to the margins. I was the survivor, the one preparing to strike back. And Vanessa Hale would never see it coming. I never thought there would come a day when my own son, the child I held, raised, comforted for more than 30 years, would block me the way someone blocks a nuisance caller. But he did, without warning, without hesitation. The morning after I refused to sign the house transfer, Lucas disappeared from my life in the literal sense. When I called to ask if he had calmed down, a cold, automated voice answered, "The number you have dialed is not reachable." I tried texting. 2 hours later, the message failed to deliver. I checked social media, Messenger, Instagram, even Facebook, and then I saw the most painful sentence a mother can read. "You can't message this user." I had been blocked completely. No door left to reach my son. I sat silently in the living room, listening to the wall clock click forward, each beat like a countdown of my relevance in Lucas's life, and each one tightening my chest. I had braced myself for Vanessa to keep attacking, to keep lying, to keep poisoning Lucas's mind. But I never imagined she could push him to erase every line of contact with me in a single night. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I sent a small gift for the baby in Vanessa's belly, a knitted blanket I made myself, the same pattern I once used for Lucas when he was little. I knew Vanessa wasn't pregnant, but Lucas believed she was. And I wanted my son to know I still loved him, no matter what side he stood on. 3 days later, the package came back, written across the box in marker, "Return to sender." I stood over the box like a ghost. My hands shook so badly I couldn't lift the lid. Something inside me fell into a deep, empty pit. Not anger, not embarrassment. It was the feeling of being erased from my son's life with a gesture as simple as a scribble. That night, I turned on the kitchen light, made a cup of peppermint tea, and sat down as I had every evening since Richard passed. But that night, the tea didn't smell fragrant. It tasted bitter, very bitter. By the 3rd week, I created a hidden account using a false name and a default profile picture. I never thought I would be pushed to the point of watching my son from the shadows like this. But if he wouldn't let me enter his life through the front door, I had no choice but to look through the cracks. I searched for Vanessa first, and it took me less than a minute. Her page was updated constantly. Colorful photos, bright smiles, captions about happiness, family, preparing for motherhood. Hundreds of comments under each post praising her. Strangers saw her as an angel ready to become a mother. I watched each picture, each video. In a 15-second clip, Vanessa placed her hand on her belly and gently turned, smiling softly. A smile I knew very well was nothing more than performance. No slight skin stretch, no change in posture, no heavier breathing, no signs of pregnancy. But the clip was flooded with congratulatory comments. And then I saw the post that made my heart ache so sharply I had to grip the table to stay standing. Our baby shower. A lavish party. Giant floral arches, multi-layered cake, piles of gifts, gold and pink balloons. In the photos were Vanessa's family, Vanessa's friends, a few of Lucas's co-workers, but not me. Not a single trace suggesting I ever existed in that world. I stared at the picture for a long, long time. Everyone in it was smiling. Vanessa stood in the center, hand on her perfectly flat stomach, eyes sparkling as if she were living a perfect life, while I, The mother of the man about to become a father was erased from everything simply because I stood between her and the assets my husband left behind. Every day after that was another knife, not because I was hated, but because I was forgotten. I asked myself over and over, so many times the question itself frightened me. If I died right now, would Lucas even know? One night, I walked into my bedroom, turned on the lamp, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared into nothing. At 66, I had lost my husband, lost the family I had known for decades, and now I was close to losing my only child. People say loneliness is being in a crowded room and still feeling empty. But for me, loneliness was looking at my phone and knowing for certain it would not light up with Lucas's name. And then I remembered something Richard once said in his final years when he watched me take care of everything, even when my back ached and my eyes were tired. Eleanor, love isn't something you endure forever. It has to be protected, and sometimes it has to be released to save yourself. His words echoed as gently as breath, yet strong enough to pull me out of the dark. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I stood up, turned on the office light, opened the file Briggs gave me, and began sorting every piece of evidence into categories: finances, fraud, infidelity, manipulation, fake pregnancy, attempted asset seizure. I wrote clear titles for each section, numbered everything, added notes. Each page I placed on the table was a blade turned back, sharper, more precise. Each file I backed up was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. Each piece of evidence I highlighted was a reminder I was not defeated. I gathered everything into a counterattack file, almost as thick as my wedding album. But unlike that album, this one held no memories. It held truth strong enough to sway any court. When I closed the file, it was midnight. The desk lamp made the pages glow like a lantern. I laid my hand on the cover, feeling a confidence I hadn't felt in months. Just as I reached to turn off the light and head to bed, my phone vibrated. A phone call at 12:17 a.m. The screen showed only one name, Lucas. I held my breath. And just like that, after 6 months of being erased, my son was calling me in the middle of the night. The late-night call made my heart skip a beat. I stared at Lucas's name pulsing on the screen, my hands trembling slightly as if touching it might shatter everything. 6 months without a single word from him. 6 months hearing his voice only through Vanessa's videos. 6 months of being turned into a ghost. I answered, "Mom." Lucas's voice was small, unsteady, but not with emotion. It sounded like someone reading lines they had been told to recite. Vanessa said, "You can come to the wedding." I can. Not that he wants me there. Vanessa allows it. I heard every layer of meaning buried beneath that sentence. I didn't respond right away. I looked out the window. The thin snow over the neighbor's roof, the streetlight casting a pale gold glow across the glass. The whole world seemed silent, as if listening to this conversation. "What time is the wedding?" I asked. 1:30, but you should come early. Vanessa wants to test the seating arrangement." I closed my eyes. My seat. A decorative prop. Nothing more. "All right," I said, "I'll come." Lucas exhaled in relief so clearly I could hear it through the phone. "Thank you, Mom. Vanessa will be happy." Vanessa, not Lucas. The call ended, leaving behind a hollow space inside me, dark but also sharp, like a blade forming its edge. I knew the only reason they invited me, to make Vanessa's family look good, to have photos of the bride and groom beside the forgiven mother, to use me as a backdrop for their staged perfection. I set the phone on the table, and I smiled, A small smile without joy, only the clarity of someone who had finally seen the whole game. If they thought I would come to bow my head, they would soon learn I was going there to finish this. The next morning, I met with Grant, Smith again. He sat in his darkwood office, fingers interlaced, eyes studying me as if wanting to confirm my resolve one last time. Eleanor, you understand that after this strike, nothing will ever go back to the way it was, right? I don't want things to go back, I replied. I want the truth to speak. Grant nodded, then called someone in. A middle-aged man entered, chalk dust on his jacket, a magnifying loupe hanging around his neck, the technician Grant had mentioned. "This is Mr. Cal," Grant said. "Professional, absolutely discreet." Mr. Cal set his laptop on the table. "You want access to your son's iCloud?" His voice was low, steady. I nodded. "I need whatever Vanessa has said to Lucas, and I need to send something for him to see right at the wedding." Mr. Cal got to work immediately, fingers moving so fast across the keyboard I couldn't keep up. I gave him everything I knew: Lucas's birthday, old passwords, security questions. He tried possibility after possibility with patient precision. After just 12 minutes, he looked up, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "We're in." My heart dropped a beat. Part of me wanted this to succeed. Another part feared facing the truth head on. Messages, photos, notes, voice memos, location history. All of it appeared before us. Mr. Cal filtered through the keywords Grant requested. Pregnancy, money, moms, a property, cells, a plan, doctor, he fake. One conversation after another surfaced, like mirrors wiped clean, revealing a truth I already knew, yet still hurt to see. Vanessa pushed Lucas to cut all contact with me. Vanessa fabricated prenatal visits. Vanessa bought fake ultrasound images online. Vanessa discussed with friends how to pressure Lucas into demanding the house. Vanessa called me an old obstacle. And worst of all, Vanessa promised Lucas, "When you have the house in your name, you'll be the owner. I'll take care of everything else." I clenched my fists, feeling like someone had shoved me off a cliff and caught me right before I hit the ground. Grant looked at me seriously. "Eleanor, this is gold-level evidence." I inhaled. "I want these messages sent straight to Lucas's phone, but not immediately." Mr. Cal nodded. "You want a timer?" "Yes." "For when?" "Right when the ceremony begins," I said. "When Lucas and Vanessa are standing before everyone. When no one can take back their words. When no one can run from the truth." Mr. Cal started setting it up. Messages sent from Lucas's own iCloud to Lucas's own phone. Messages that cannot be deleted before viewing, locked on the screen until opened. I chose 4 items. The entire conversation where Vanessa admits she is not actually pregnant. Photos of Vanessa with the gym trainer. Evidence of her debt and her plan to seize assets. A recording of her calling Lucas. Easy to control. I set the time. 2:40 p.m., the exact moment of the marriage vows. Everything exactly as Grant wanted. A strike that cannot be dodged, cannot be edited, cannot be erased. When it was done, Mr. Cal closed the laptop. "The switch is flipped," he said. "The clock will take care of the rest." I stood, thanked them both, and left the office. I knew I had crossed a line I could never step back from, but I also knew if I didn't move forward, Vanessa would crush Lucas's life and mine. The wedding day arrived. The Portland sky was gray and cold, the wind curling under my collar and raising goosebumps along my skin. I chose my best dress, the navy gown Richard gave me on our 18th anniversary. I draped a silk scarf over my shoulders, added a touch of lipstick, smoothed my hair. not to impress anyone, but to walk into battle with my head held high. When I reached the church, I immediately felt the disapproval radiating from Vanessa's family. They looked at me like a defective decoration someone had mistakenly included in their perfect tableau. Vanessa stood near the entrance. When she saw me, she smiled, but the smile was sharp as a pin. "Oh, Mrs. Eleanor, you made it after all," I answered softly. I always keep my word. "Hope you know where your seat is," Vanessa said, glancing at her mother. "Not everyone is a main character." I didn't reply. I simply looked at her for one brief second, a second long enough for her to realize I was no longer the trembling mother she used to strike at so easily. Lucas walked over. His eyes were uneasy but cold, like someone balancing precariously between two worlds. "Mom, please don't do anything to upset Vanessa, okay?" I placed a hand on his arm. "No, sweetheart, I don't need to do anything." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I gave a small, subtle smile, like one of the lessons Richard used to teach me. Not every truth requires words. Sometimes a well-timed look is enough. I tilted my head slightly and whispered, "Check your phone, son." Lucas squinted, confused. But Vanessa, her face drained of color instantly. I left the church before the ceremony began. I didn't want to stand there. I didn't need to witness the moment everything collapsed. I returned home, hung my scarf, turned on the kettle, and sat in the armchair by the window, the one Richard always loved. 2:39 p.m., the clock hand crept forward. 2:40 p.m., the distant church bells rang, and I knew. Right at that moment, Lucas's phone was vibrating in rapid bursts. Right at that moment, the truth was breaking open in front of my son's eyes. Right at that moment, Vanessa Hale was losing everything she'd carefully constructed. I set my teacup down, folded my hands, and whispered softly, "Richard, now watch how we protect our family." 2:40 p.m. The moment I had waited weeks for, not with gloating, but with a strange sense of calm, was unfolding somewhere just a few blocks away. I wasn't there, but from what guests later told me, combined with what I imagined from the messages delivered right on schedule, the entire wedding scene formed sharply in my mind, vivid enough that I could almost hear Lucas's breath falter when he saw his phone screen. When the church bells began, Lucas stood beside Vanessa at the altar, hands loosely holding her bouquet, his face tense with nerves mixed with exhaustion. Vanessa looked more radiant than ever. Her white gown fitted perfectly, a long veil cascading behind her, her smile triumphant, deeper than usual because she believed everything had fallen into place, until Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, then 3 times, then continuously, like frantic warnings from a failing heartbeat. At first, Lucas ignored it. The officiant began the opening words, but the phone buzzed again, longer, stronger. Guests turned to look. Vanessa shot Lucas a sharp glance, tightening her jaw but keeping her smile fixed for the cameras. "Turn it off," she hissed through her teeth. "It's rude." But something in Lucas, some buried instinct, told him to look. He reached into his pocket and glanced at the screen. A message from himself, from his own iCloud account. "Lucas, look at this." He frowned and opened it, and in the next second, Lucas's knees nearly gave out. Video 1, Vanessa removing the fake pregnancy belly. The screen faded from black into a clear image of Vanessa in the gym restroom. She turned in front of the mirror, then used both hands to peel off a thin silicone layer from her stomach, rolled it up, and tossed it into her bag. On the mirror, her reflection showed a smirk. Smug, satisfied, nothing like the gentle persona she showed Lucas. At the ceremony, Lucas froze. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands shook so violently the phone almost slipped. Guests whispered, "What's wrong with him?" "What's on the phone? Is the bride turning pale?" Seeing Lucas's face drain of color, Vanessa rushed closer, tugging on his sleeve. "Lucas, what's wrong? You're scaring me." But before Lucas could answer, the second message popped up. Audio. Vanessa plotting to have me declared incompetent to seize my assets. A short recording, one I had listened to many times before deciding to send it. Vanessa's voice, cold as ice. "If his mom won't sign, we'll prove she's mentally unfit. A doctor only needs to check a few boxes. Once the house is transferred, he's the legal owner. That's it." Then another woman's voice. "And the baby?" Vanessa's dry laugh. "We won't need it anymore. I just want the house and the Harrington name." The moment Vanessa's laugh echoed through the audio in the church, it was as if someone had punched Lucas straight in the chest. "No way," Lucas stammered. Vanessa tried to touch his arm. Lucas jerked her hand away. Guests began standing up, lifting their phones, recording everything. Another message came in. Lucas opened it and was so stunned he nearly dropped his phone. Photos. Vanessa cheating with the gym trainer, images from different days, them holding hands, hugging, even walking into a hotel room together. Vanessa screamed, her voice sharper than every echo in the church. "That's photoshopped. Someone wants to ruin our happy day. Lucas, you have to believe me." But Lucas could no longer stand firmly. Everything he had believed for the past year was collapsing into pieces right before his eyes. Then the final message popped up. Debt and fraud evidence. A long list. All the debts. All the past scams. All the plans to drain Lucas financially. All the ways she mocked him for being easy to control. Vanessa lunged forward to snatch the phone, but Lucas stepped back just in time. His face turned ghostly pale. "Vanessa," Lucas said, his voice trembling and broken. "You're not pregnant." The words cracked through the church like thunder. The entire room fell silent, then erupted into chaos. Guests whispered loudly, some covering their mouths, some zooming their phones toward the bride, some calling others over to look. Vanessa shrieked, "No, it's not like that. You're being tricked. Someone edited." "But why does everything match?" Lucas shouted, losing control for the first time in his life. His voice split the air, raw with the deepest betrayal a man could experience. Every head in the room turned toward the bride. Vanessa pretended to cry, collapsing to her knees and covering her face. But no one believed those tears. It looked like an amateur performance, forced, hollow, desperate. At that moment, a guest rushed forward to steady Lucas, who looked like he might fall. Another dragged Vanessa back as she began thrashing and screaming. "No, you have to believe me. None of this is real. Your mother ruined us." Lucas stared straight at her, eyes bloodshot but unwavering. "I have nothing left to believe." Then he turned and ran out of the wedding. No one reacted fast enough. No one chased him. Only Vanessa remained, surrounded by cameras, whispers, and the ruins of the future she never imagined would collapse. Lucas ran across the parking lot, yanked open his car door, started the engine, and sped off like a man with no bearings. But the heart always knows its way home. And the road Lucas chose was not to Vanessa's house, not to the reception hall, not to the luxury apartment they rented for their happy family photos. It was to my home. While I sat in the living room, my hand resting on a cup of tea gone cold, watching the clock tick to minute 41, The screech of brakes rang out on my porch. Then frantic footsteps. Then a pounding on the door, not knocking, but hammering, as if the hand doing it was shaking with pain and despair. "Mom, Mom, open the door!" Lucas's voice, the voice of the son I thought I had lost forever. I stood, opened the door, and Lucas collapsed at my feet, eyes red, still clutching the phone filled with the messages I had delivered into his life at exactly 2:40 p.m. "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked down at my grown son, broken, crumbling, on the same doorstep where Richard had once carried him inside for the first time when he could barely walk. In that moment, I understood one thing clearly. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I wasn't fighting alone. Lucas fell to his knees on my porch, as if his legs could no longer support the weight of the truth and the shame crushing his heart. Snow speckled the shoulders of his suit jacket, his breath shivering in the cold Portland air, but it wasn't the weather making him shake. It was everything he had just watched come apart at the wedding. "Mom," Lucas choked out, gripping the door frame like it was the only solid thing left in his life. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I looked at my grown son kneeling there, eyes bloodshot, and in that moment, every wall I had built to protect myself these past months seemed to crumble. I didn't see a man who had turned his back on his mother. I saw the little boy I used to carry, the boy whose tears I once wiped away, the boy I held close when he stumbled for the first time. I knelt in front of him and placed my hand on his cheek. His skin was hot with tears, his eyes filled with panic, begging for one simple thing, so simple it made my chest tighten. "Please tell me you're still here." I pulled him into my arms, held him tightly as if I could pull him back from the edge Vanessa had pushed him toward. "My son," I whispered, "I never left." Lucas pressed his face into my shoulder, sobs shaking through him in waves. His whole body trembled like a child abandoned for too long who had finally found shelter. I helped him inside, made hot tea, draped a towel over his shoulders. He sat frozen for a long time, hands covering his face, eyes hollow as if trying to piece together the fragments of a life shattered in front of an entire room of people. "Mom?" Lucas finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you let me turn against you like that?" I set the cup down. "Because if I had told you, you wouldn't have believed me. You were trapped inside the reality Vanessa built. Only when you saw it with your own eyes could you step out." Lucas nodded weakly, tears falling again. "I was so stupid. I let someone like her control my mind. I hurt you. You were a victim," I said softly, "not a villain." He pressed his face into my palm, a gesture he used to make as a child whenever he woke from a nightmare. When he finally calmed, I took him to the living room and brought out the file Richard had left behind. The one I had never shown Lucas because I promised Richard I would wait until our son became a man in his own right. "Why did Dad want to keep this a secret?" Lucas asked as I set the file on the table. "Because your father wanted you to be strong enough before taking responsibility," I said. "He believed in you, even if he didn't live long enough to see it." I opened the folder, the transfer documents for the factory, the investments, the shares, the final amended will. Everything had Lucas's name on it, along with one condition: he could only inherit when free from anyone's influence outside the family. When Lucas read that line, his lips pressed together and trembled. I almost lost everything. Because of a few sweet words from her, he whispered. "You weren't wrong, Lucas," I reassured him. "People like Vanessa build walls out of compliments, cages out of fake affection, and chains out of guilt. She knew you valued family, so she turned family into a weapon against you." Lucas dropped his head into his hands, shoulders falling as he finally understood the painful but freeing truth. I was manipulated. A few days later, Lucas went to see a therapist on his own. I didn't push him. I only asked, "Do you want someone to talk to?" He answered immediately, "Yes, I don't want to be the man I became this past year." I watched him walk into the clinic, shoulders straight, step steady. He had recognized his wound, and those who recognize their wounds always have a chance to heal. One afternoon, Lucas came back with a calmer expression. He placed a new folder on the table. "Mom, I want to run the factory with you, and I want to do it for Dad and for myself, not to prove anything to anyone." I looked at my son, the son I feared I had lost to Vanessa, standing before me with clear eyes for the first time in years. "Your father would be so proud," I said, and I meant it with all my heart. And then, strangely, after months of darkness, I felt light finally slipping back through the cracks inside me. The police soon opened an investigation into Vanessa. From messages, financial evidence, recordings, videos, everything exposed fraud, deception, attempted asset seizure, and violations of several legal statutes. When the news spread, her former victims came forward too. People she had scammed with false romantic promises, clients she misled while posing as an influencer. I didn't rejoice at seeing someone dragged into the light so brutally, but I didn't pity her either. Some people only stop when they are stopped. The night the police took Vanessa in for questioning, Lucas stood beside me at the window, watching the patrol car turn the corner. He said nothing, but he placed his hand over mine, warm, steady. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for saving me." I smiled. "No, sweetheart, you saved yourself. I only handed you the lantern." In the weeks that followed, our lives slowly settled into a new rhythm. We ate breakfast together. Each morning, planned improvements for the factory, shared stories about Richard. Every afternoon, Lucas spent an hour in therapy, returning lighter each time. One evening, he sat beside me and said, "Mom, I know I can't erase what I did, but I promise you, I'll never abandon you like that again." I cupped his cheek. "Love doesn't need to be perfect, Lucas. It just needs to be real." The house warmed again. No more heavy silence. No more nights spent alone with a loneliness so deep I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. I began to see real light again, the light of hope, healing, and a family finding its way through the storm. But even as our lives rebuilt themselves, out there was a woman whose darkness did not surrender easily. As I closed my office door to head to bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. "Don't think this is over, Mrs. Harrington." No name, no number, no profile picture, but I recognized that tone instantly. Vanessa Hale wasn't done. That anonymous message that night made me stand still for a while, as if those disembodied words carried a cold draft that slid down my spine. But unlike the early months of fear, this time I didn't tremble, didn't drop my phone, and didn't sit for hours questioning what I had done wrong. I simply looked at the screen for 3 seconds, then set the phone down on the table. I had come too far to fear Vanessa Hale ever again. A few days later, everything began shifting in ways none of us expected. The police called Lucas in to provide more testimony. The evidence I had submitted, combined with statements from her past victims, opened an official investigation, not into Lucas, into Vanessa. The day Vanessa was arrested, I was watering the garden in the backyard. Lucas burst in through the gate, panting as if he had run all the way. "Mom, they arrested her. Vanessa is really under arrest." I set the watering can down and looked at my son. Morning light fell across his face, the kind of light I hadn't seen there in many years, a light of liberation. "Are you sure?" I asked. Lucas nodded repeatedly. "There's video. People are posting it everywhere. She was handcuffed in front of her apartment, Mom. The police listed so many charges: financial fraud, falsifying documents, identity fraud, even conspiracy to seize assets from someone deemed incapacitated." I understood. I didn't feel joy, but somewhere deep inside, a part of me finally exhaled, because my son was finally free from the toxic net Vanessa had thrown over him. Lucas sat beside me on the steps, his arms wrapped around his knees, sighing heavily. "Mom, how could I have been so blind? How did I let her drag me that far?" I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You weren't weak. You were longing to be loved. And Vanessa knew exactly how to exploit that." "But now I want to be different," Lucas said, his voice steadier. "I want to rebuild my life from the ground up." I looked at him. The grown man who had once lost his path, now finding it again. And for the first time in years, I saw Richard in his eyes, calm, thoughtful, someone who faced consequences instead of running from them. In the months that followed, Lucas spent most of his days at the factory. He learned to read reports, to manage staff, to stand before a team and make decisions. Some evenings, he came to my house with stacks of documents, drinking tea while asking me questions one by one. How would Dad have handled this? Did you ever do this back then? Am I going in the right direction? I watched my son grow up a second time, not into an adult, but into a man with real strength. One afternoon, Lucas stopped by Richard's factory to check the production line, and there he met Grace Miller. I didn't hear her name from Lucas first, but from an older worker who had once been very close to Richard. "That Grace girl," she said when I visited the factory. "She's truly kind. When Lucas was still hurting, she kept her distance. When he started getting better, she began talking to him. That woman knows boundaries." I only smiled, but something in my heart softened. Unlike Vanessa, who rushed in fast, strong, and cut into Lucas's emptiness to fill it with control, Grace appeared as someone who simply walked beside him. Not ahead, not over him, just beside him. She was 37 with 2 little daughters, Emma and Lily, 2 curly-haired angels who toddled around the factory yard each afternoon while their mother worked overtime. Grace wasn't dazzlingly beautiful or flashy, but she had eyes that listened and a smile shaped by loss, making her cherish every small thing. When I met her in the conference room for the first time, Grace immediately stood up. "Hello, Mrs. Eleanor, I've heard a lot about you," I asked, half teasing. "All good things, I hope?" Grace laughed. "Yes, all things that make me want to learn from you." There wasn't a millimeter of pretense in that smile, and to me, that was more precious than any compliment. From that day, Lucas and Grace talked more, not with the urgency of people clinging to each other out of fear, but with the slow steadiness of 2 people building something real from the ground up. One evening, Lucas came to my house, taking off his coat as his cheeks reddened. "Mom, I invited Grace and the girls for dinner this weekend, if that's okay." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me or asking for my blessing?" Lucas laughed. A laugh filled with a lightness I hadn't heard since long before Vanessa. That dinner became one of the happiest evenings of my life. Emma ran around my living room, touching everything, then turning to me. "Grandma, whose is this?" I laughed. "Your temporary Grandpa Richard's." Everyone burst out laughing. Lily climbed into my lap after dessert as naturally as if I had always been part of her life. "Grandma Eleanor, tell a story," she said, eyes sparkling. I looked at Lucas. He smiled and nodded. So I told them stories about Richard, stories Lucas had heard 100 times, but listened to again that night as if hearing them new. At one moment, Lucas's eyes met Grace's, and I understood that my family was slowly filling back up with a love that wasn't loud but steady. In the months that followed, my house was no longer a quiet, shadowy place. It was full of children's laughter, the sound of dishes clinking at dinner, and the soft music Richard loved at the end of the day. Lucas cared for Emma and Lily as if they were two little stars hung back into a sky that had once gone dark. I became Grandma Eleanor to the girls, a name that warmed my heart. I wasn't their grandmother by blood, but family, I realized, has never been defined solely by blood. It is defined by choice, by who we open our hearts to. One evening, Lucas leaned against the kitchen doorway as I washed dishes. Arms crossed, he smiled. "Mom, lately when I look in the mirror, I see Dad." I paused. "In what way?" "In the way he said, a man becomes grown when he knows how to protect, not control. When he knows how to repent, not blame. When he knows how to stay instead of run." I stood still for a moment. I saw Richard in that sentence. I saw him standing behind Lucas, placing a hand on his shoulder as if he had been waiting a long time for Lucas to return. "Your father is very proud," I whispered. Lucas stepped forward and hugged me from behind, just like when he was a tall, lanky boy who still loved to press his face against my shoulder. "And you pulled me out of the darkest place. I owe you my life." I turned and hugged him. "You owe me nothing. Just live well." And Lucas was living better than ever. As for Vanessa, weeks later she appeared on the evening news. Head down, hair messy, a loose coat barely covering the handcuffs on her wrists. The anchor listed her charges: credit fraud, falsifying documents, identity scams, intentional exploitation of the elderly. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I simply watched, then turned off the TV. Some chapters must be closed before new ones can begin. When everything settled, when the factory became stronger under Lucas's leadership, when Grace and the girls became warm, familiar presences at every dinner, when my once empty home filled with laughter again. I knew I had reached the end of a very long journey, a journey of loss, betrayal, pain, and rebirth. One afternoon, I sat alone in my study. The late sunlight touched the cover of my old wedding album. I placed my hand on it and closed my eyes. Richard, I kept my promise. I protected him. Outside the door came Emma and Lily's voices calling each other, Lucas's laughter following close behind. I got up and opened the door, watching my new family spill through the hallway. Family isn't always blood. Family is who remains when the storm passes, and I knew it was time to close that painful chapter, a chapter full of tears, but also full of strength. I stepped out of the room and joined the laughter outside. A new chapter was beginning. 2 years passed faster than I expected. The light in my life no longer flickered like those stormy days. It stood steady, warm, shining patiently over the small home where Lucas and I found each other again. Every morning I saw a familiar sight on the porch. Lucas driving Richard's old pickup truck out of the gate, carrying the lunch Grace made for him. And every evening he returned to the sound of Emma and Lily running across the yard to greet him. The factory thrived under Lucas's leadership. He introduced improvements, expanded contracts, rebuilt the office wing. Most importantly, he worked with humility, attentiveness, and determination. the very qualities I once feared he had lost during his time with Vanessa. But now, watching him step into life with a steady stride, I understood that sometimes people must walk through a dark forest to recognize the value of sunlight. One spring afternoon, I brought a fresh apple pie to Lucas's office. The smell of cinnamon and warm butter reminded me sharply of Richard. He used to bring pies like this to workers whenever the factory hit an important milestone. Lucas opened the door, his eyes lighting up. "Mom, you really baked this for me." "Of course," I said, setting the pie on the desk. "Your father used to do the same. I'm only continuing the tradition." Lucas fell silent for a moment, then pulled me into a hug. Not the desperate, collapsing hug from that shattered wedding day, but the peaceful embrace of a son who had found his true home again. "Thank you, Mom," he murmured. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I hurt you so much." I stroked his back gently, unwilling to reopen old wounds. "That's what your father wanted, and what I wanted. You came back. That's all that matters." Some nights later, during a light drizzle, I sat down at my old computer to clean up my photo library. I froze when I opened a folder I never wanted to see again. Vanessa. Dozens of photos appeared. Her practiced smiles, her lavish parties, her empty promises. I looked at them one by one, as though seeing ghosts of myself in the years I had been fragile. Without hesitation, I hit delete. As the trash icon spun, it felt as though someone lifted a stone off my chest. No more images of the woman who nearly destroyed my family. No more remnants for old pain to cling to. Only peace remained. I returned to my desk, opened the journal I had kept during the darkest months, and wrote a final line. A truth my heart had taken years to comprehend. I am not a victim. I am a fortress. It was true. I didn't collapse when pushed out of my son's life. I didn't disappear when slandered. I didn't break when loneliness filled every room. I stood up, fought, protected, and reclaimed the light. Lucas, Grace, Emma, and Lily were the greatest gift life returned to me after everything I had lost. We shared dinner together every night. Lucas grilling meat, Grace making salad, the girls running circles around the yard, and me sitting back, grateful for every second. I still believed Richard was watching us from somewhere. I felt his warmth whenever Lucas laughed in that voice so much like his father's. I saw him in the way Lucas placed his hand gently but firmly on the girl's shoulders. Richard was smiling, I knew it. Smiling, proud, and relieved that our family had found its way home. One weekend dinner, we sat around the old wooden table Richard built by hand. The smell of grilled food, the children's giggles, the soft yellow light. It was all so perfect, I paused for a moment just to etch it into my heart. "Grandma Eleanor, tell a story." Emma climbed into my lap. I stroked her hair and began telling a story, my voice slow and full of the breath of happiness. It felt like closing a chapter, not with sorrow, but with completeness. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If my journey reminded you of a pain you once carried, or a hope you're still holding, I would love to know where you're listening from. A small town, a distant state, or a quiet corner of the world. Please share your voice with me in the comments. If this story brought you strength, please like, subscribe, and join me for the next journeys. Every view and every shared moment from you is what allows me to keep telling stories for hearts that have weathered many storms. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for your companionship. Thank you for the warmth you bring to this place. I wish you peace and the quiet strength you've always had. I was tightening a stair rail when I heard violent pounding on the door. "Mrs. Holloway, open up immediately. We're here to seize the property." I hadn't even processed the words when an officer held a thick stack of papers in front of me. "You're past due on 3 mortgage loans taken out in your name. If you don't vacate, we're required to enforce removal." My heart dropped hard. I had never borrowed a single dollar. My fingers trembled as I flipped to the first page. My signature, forged so perfectly it made my stomach twist. And on the last page was my husband's signature, Harold Holloway, the man who had died exactly 7 days ago. I gripped the papers tight. If Harold had dragged me into hell, I would climb my way back out myself. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I froze in the doorway. My hand shook so hard I had to grab the railing just to steady myself. This house, the light blue one on the corner of Willow Creek, where Harold and I had lived for 35 years, had suddenly become a trap I never knew I was standing in. The officer said a few more procedural lines, his voice flat like he was reporting the weather, but I heard nothing except the loud thudding in my ears. Something had collapsed, and the sound of it drowned out everything else. When they left, I shut the door and slid down onto the cold wooden floor. I held the papers to my chest, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. I looked toward Harold's framed photo on the shelf, him smiling, his arm around my shoulder at our 30th wedding anniversary. I'd always thought of him as solid, dependable, maybe overly cautious but trustworthy. I never imagined I would someday stand at this point in my life, facing the threat of losing my home because of the very man who had vowed to protect me until the end. But if I wanted to understand what was happening, I had to start with last week, the day Harold died. Harold passed on a Monday morning suddenly in his office at the accounting firm. A severe heart attack. No warning, no last words. When his manager called, I had been standing in the kitchen preparing a late breakfast. I remember dropping the spoon onto the floor. I drove to the hospital like someone out of her mind, but by the time I arrived, Harold was already cold. I cried. But strangely, the grief felt thin, like a layer of mist that could be blown away with the slightest breeze. At the funeral, instead of sinking into sorrow the way everyone expected, I felt something else entirely. One deep breath that carried a quiet, unsettling sense of relief. A feeling I immediately felt ashamed of. I had loved Harold, but in recent years, something in our marriage had shifted. He spoke less, snapped more, and above all, he strictly refused to let me touch anything related to finances. "You don't need to worry about that," he always said. "Let me handle it. I know what I'm doing." For 35 years, I believed him, and now I was paying the price. One day, after the funeral, when the house had returned to its familiar, unsettling silence, I received the first envelope, no sender name. Inside was a letter from West Shore Bank informing me that I, Evelyn Holloway, was the co-holder of a secret safe deposit box. I remember sitting in the kitchen chair, reading the lines again and again until my temples burned. In over 3 decades, Harold had never mentioned any safe deposit box. I didn't even know he used West Shore Bank. He had always talked about Union Federal. I called Justin, my son. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can we talk later?" "It's important, Justin. Is this about Dad's finances?" "Mom, it's nothing. Dad always had everything planned." He hung up before I finished my sentence. I called Mia, my daughter, hoping she would listen. "Oh, Mom, please. Dad always had his own things. Don't make a big deal out of it right now. I'm dropping the kids off." A sigh, a forced laugh. a dismissive sentence. I went silent. Why were both of them acting like Harold had warned them? Or worse, like they already knew something and weren't telling me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold standing at the closet, fixing his tie for Monday morning, smoothing the collar, grabbing his keys, and saying the familiar line, "I need to stop by the bank. Won't be long." For 35 years, he had never missed a Monday morning trip. I once thought it was just a workplace habit. I even found it endearing. But that night, sitting alone in the dim living room, surrounded by the smell of old wood and warm yellow light, a chill crawled over my skin. Harold hadn't gone to the bank out of habit. He had gone because of something he didn't want anyone to know, something he didn't want me to know. I stood up and turned on the light in Harold's old office. His neatly arranged files lined the shelves. Everything was so orderly it felt emotionless. I opened drawers. Most were empty or filled with unrelated documents. But when I pulled the lowest drawer on the left, I found a strange hollow space, the perfect size for a small metal box. Harold had kept something there, and now it was gone. A cold, prickling sensation slid from the base of my skull down my spine. I shut the drawer, walked out, and stared at the envelope from the bank. A secret safe deposit box. Harold's secret. Something he had protected throughout our 35-year marriage without ever sharing with me. I picked up the phone and called West Shore Bank using the number on the letter. The employee's voice was gentle but cautious, as if she had been expecting my call. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway, we confirm you're the co-holder. You can schedule a time to access the box." I swallowed. "Earliest time available, please." "We have an opening. Thursday morning at 10. 2 days away, long enough to fall apart from worry. After the call, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark living room. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than usual. I thought about my marriage, how I once thought Harold was simple, a man who worked, read the morning paper, mowed the lawn on weekends, kept our home neat like an audit sheet. But he had hidden too much, for too long. I thought about that strange sense of relief at the funeral, the one I tried to bury. Maybe my heart had sensed the truth long before my mind caught up. I buried my face in my hands. I didn't know what I would find in that box, but I knew it wouldn't be money or anything good. It felt like I was standing before a door sealed shut for years, and the key was now sitting in my lap. Thursday morning. That would be the moment everything shattered. And as I realized that, I heard myself whisper a sentence I didn't fully understand until much later. My life is about to be torn apart. I arrived at West Shore Bank nearly 30 minutes early. Not because I was eager, but because I couldn't bear to stay in that house filled with Harold's shadows. Portland's morning was gray and misty, a layer of drizzle blurring the bank's glass facade. I stood before the glass, seeing my reflection, a 66-year-old woman about to face a truth that could destroy 35 years of marriage. The automatic doors slid open as I approached. A cold gust of air rushed over me. The place smelled of new carpet, paperwork, and a faint trace of coffee. I had never stepped inside before, even though Harold came here every week as if it were his second home. For years, I simply smiled when he grabbed his keys and said, "I need to stop by the bank." I never asked why. Now I wished I had. A woman in a navy suit approached, her smile wide enough to feel unnatural. "Mrs. Holloway, we've been expecting you." Her voice was soft, but her demeanor made me feel like I was walking into a boardroom instead of a safe deposit area. "Yes, that's me." I tried to keep my tone steady. "Please follow me." She walked quickly, decisively. I followed, feeling like I was being led into an examination I hadn't agreed to. Passing rows of desks and small offices, I noticed employees stealing quick glances at me before looking away. A man signing paperwork paused mid-stroke as we walked by. It hit me then. Harold had been a frequent visitor here, very frequent, enough that everyone knew exactly who I was, and maybe they knew what I was about to discover. The woman led me to a heavy door that opened with both a key and a card. It slid aside to reveal a vault room lined with metal drawers stretching endlessly, each one like a silver tooth, uniform and silent. "We've prepared box number 312 for you," she said with a slight nod. "Call if you need anything." I watched her go. Her excessive politeness, the lowered eyes, the soft voice, felt like pity. She knew what I was about to face, and I didn't. When she left, I stood alone in the cold, sterile room. On the table sat a long metal box, neatly placed as if it had been waiting for me all this time. When I touched it, I nearly pulled back. It was heavier than I expected, almost like it was filled with stones. I dragged it closer. The metal rail made a dry clicking sound. I took a deep breath and opened the lid. Inside were 3 thick folders, arranged with Harold's usual precision. Even his deception was tidy, and on top lay a cream envelope, thick, familiar, the kind Harold used for anniversary notes, but the writing froze my blood. "Evelyn, if you're reading this..." I set the letter aside instantly. I couldn't touch it yet, not before I saw what was underneath. I opened the first folder. The rustle of paper echoed too loudly in the quiet room. Investment summaries appeared, red numbers everywhere, losses, heavy losses, nearly 10 years of failed investments. I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound. Harold had thrown money into funds I'd never heard of. Reckless entries, bizarre transfers, some like tossing money down a well. He didn't just fail, he hid his failures by doubling down. I opened the second folder. My heart pounded. I braced myself, but it wasn't enough. 4 home equity loans against our house. I reread it. Then again, each loan in my name, my signature so perfectly forged, it could have fooled me if I didn't know I'd never signed anything like it. The house I lived in might have belonged to the bank for years. Harold had turned our home into a cover for his losses. He used my name as a shield. My vision blurred. My breath came short. Tears spilled before I realized it. When I opened the third folder, I didn't even try to steady myself. 18 credit cards, all in my name. Total debt over $130,000. I braced myself on the table to keep from collapsing. A cold wave swept through me. The tiny rows of text, the charges, the minimum payments, they were all my signatures. A flawless forgery. Harold had used my identity for years. How many? 5? 10? Long enough that I never saw it. I closed my eyes, and all I saw was Harold on Monday mornings. Blue tie, white shirt, quick steps. I need to stop by the bank. I once thought it was responsible. It was desperation. A dagger slid through the softest years of my life. It wasn't just the debt or the lies. It was that Harold had turned me, the person who trusted him most, into the target of his mistakes. I sat there for a long time, unmoving. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. When my wrists ached from supporting my weight, I opened my eyes and looked at the envelope. I wasn't ready to read it. Not yet. Inside was an explanation, a confession, a justification Harold left behind for me to bear alone. I couldn't hear his voice, even through ink. Not yet. Not when I wanted to tear the letter apart. I put it back in the box. I needed air to stand up, to hold on to whatever strength I had left before my world cracked again. And in that moment, a truth settled heavily inside me. My 35-year marriage had never been what I thought it was, and the letter inside that box would change everything once I had the courage to open it. I closed the lid, turned, and walked out. The hallway light was warm, but it couldn't thaw the cold in my chest. I kept walking until the outside air hit my face. Only then did I notice my hands and legs were shaking. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat still. The mortgages, the forged credit cards, the counterfeit signatures, all of it swirled in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. I wanted to cry and scream all at once, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't fall apart yet, not when the whole truth was still hiding inside that letter. I started the engine, placed my hands on the wheel, and whispered, though no one was there, "Harold, what else did you leave for me?" But I didn't go back to the bank. Not today. I needed time to breathe, to prepare, to become strong enough to read that letter, the one that would mark the point of no return in my life. And I knew. Once I opened it, I would no longer be the woman Harold once knew. I would become the one who faced him long after he was in the ground, and I would uncover the full truth, no matter the cost. I left the bank with the heavy metal box in my arms, but it took a long time before I had the courage to open it again. I kept it in Harold's old office, the room that always smelled of paper and oak, just the way he liked it. But every time I looked at it, my chest tightened as if someone's hand were squeezing my ribs. I knew the letter was inside, waiting. I knew the words would not only explain, but tear apart the softest memories I had left. I avoided it for 2 days. 2 days passed in a half-conscious state, doing things without truly being present in any of them. I made breakfast then, forgot to eat. I stood on the porch watching neighbors walk their dogs, heard them greet me, and responded only with an absent-minded, I tried to maintain a normal rhythm so I wouldn't fall apart, but the box still sat there like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. On the 3rd day, I woke up at 5 a.m., when Portland's sky was still a deep blue, quiet like a lake untouched by wind. I felt that if I kept avoiding it, I would lose the strength to read it at all. Fear could rip me in two, but uncertainty was even worse. I turned on the office light. The soft yellow glow spread across the wooden desk, tracing a thin outline of light around the box. My hand trembled as I lifted the lid. The letter lay on top, right where I had placed it before leaving the bank. The cream-colored paper was neatly folded, edges crisp. Harold had always done everything so meticulously. I took a breath, pulled out a chair, and sat down. When I opened the letter, it felt as if Harold were standing right behind me, silently watching. A chill ran down my spine, but I read, "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you." I stopped. My chest tightened. Even though everything he had done had pushed me to the edge, that tone, that way he said my name, still carried a piece of the man I once loved. I went on. "I'm sorry. There's no way to say this without hurting you. 8 years ago, I invested in something everyone called a sure win. I believed in it too much, and I was wrong." My eyes stung. 8 years ago. That was when Harold began changing. The nights he sat for hours in the office, the times he stayed up until morning staring at the computer screen, the sudden outbursts followed by quick apologies. Everything began around then. I thought I could fix it. Then I thought I just needed a little more time, but one investment led to another and one debt stacked on the next. I opened cards, I took out loans, I used your name. Not because I wanted to hurt you, Evelyn. I just wanted to keep us from collapsing until I found a way to make it right. I lowered the letter, my palms damp with sweat. Those words felt like poison seeping into my mind, layers of emotion piling over one another: anger, pity, confusion, heartbreak. He used my name to cover his mistakes, not once, not for a single debt, but for years. I swallowed hard and continued. I know I put you in an unforgivable position, but I was afraid, Evelyn. Afraid that if I told you, you would leave me. Afraid of the way you'd look at me, eyes full of disappointment. So I hid it. I gripped the edge of the letter. Couldn't bear it. Harold always used that excuse. But what about me? Who cared whether I could bear it? I knew my heart condition was getting worse. I could feel time running out. I should have confessed. I should have let you prepare. But I kept hoping I could fix everything before it was too late. Then, my time ran out. A tear fell onto the edge of the paper. I wiped it quickly, but the pain spread like a bruise. Harold had spent the last years of his life not only drowning in debt, but terrified of facing the truth, and he left the weight of it on my shoulders like a boulder. Evelyn, you will hate me. I deserve that. I did the worst thing a husband can do. I made you pay for my mistakes. I could hear my heartbeat, loud not from pain but from rising anger. I can leave you only this. Find the red file. It contains what you need to protect yourself. I stopped, eyes scanning the final line. I'm sorry. I love you. Even though that love couldn't save you from me. When I folded the letter, I had to put a hand over my heart to keep from collapsing. Part of me wanted to throw it away, tear it into shreds and burn it. Another part, the part that had loved Harold for 35 years, wanted to hold it close like a final relic. But the strongest feeling was anger. Anger at being betrayed. Anger at being treated like someone too fragile to face the truth. Anger that Harold had taken away my right to choose. I looked back at the box, searching through every folder, every compartment, every crease. There was no red file, no red paper, no red cover, no red label. Nothing. Harold said, "It contains what you need to protect yourself," yet he hadn't left it, or he had hidden it somewhere else. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The room was so silent I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Harold, how many more layers of secrets do you expect me to uncover? I whispered, my voice rough with exhaustion. But I knew one thing for certain. This letter wasn't the end. It was only the first door opening onto a path I had no choice but to follow, to the very end for myself. I folded the letter again, put it back into the box, but didn't lock it. I couldn't lock anything of Harold's anymore, not when there were so many unanswered questions. I stood up and walked out of the office, leaving the box slightly open like a wound that refused to close. No red file, no salvation in his final apology. Only me and the truth waiting ahead, cold as the Portland morning outside. I held the metal box for a long time before I was calm enough to call Justin. No matter how angry I was at Harold or how much I hurt, I still hoped my son could be someone I leaned on. Justin had always been the steadier one, the better listener. But when I dialed and heard the long rings, uncertainty crept in. "Mom, are you okay?" Justin answered on the fourth ring, sounding tired, as if I had just woken him, even though it was barely past 8 p.m. I took a breath. "I need to talk to you. It's important." A pause. "Is this about Dad?" I exhaled. "Yes. I found something he left behind. Not a will. A safe deposit box." A long silence made my heart contract. Justin was usually quick to respond, but this time he seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "If it's financial stuff, Mom, Dad always handled that. You're just stressed," he said, voice too controlled, too calm. It unnerved me. "Justin," I said softly, "your father took out 4 mortgages on the house, in my name. I never signed anything. There are credit cards he opened, investments he lost. I have papers. He wrote a letter admitting it." Another silence. Then a small laugh, strained, uneasy. It made my skin crawl. "Mom, you're imagining things. Dad wasn't like that." One sentence, like someone had thrown ice water in my face. "Imagining? You think I made this up? I have the documents, the forged signatures, the—" "Mom," he cut in sharply. "Dad was an honest man. Everyone knows that. Maybe the bank made a mistake, or someone tricked him. Don't jump to conclusions." I sat down at the kitchen table, feeling my entire body grow heavier. "You don't believe me?" Justin sighed, long and weary. "I believe Dad." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. One short sentence shattered everything I had been hoping for. I called Mia next, even though my heart had already cooled. She was always the more emotional one, more sensitive. Surely she would hear the desperation in my voice. "Mom," she answered quickly, "I'm getting the kids ready for a bath. What's going on?" "Mia, we need to talk about your father." Her tone changed instantly. "What now, Mom? What else do you want to say after this whole week?" I looked at the open box on the table, the folders staring back like cold, unblinking eyes. "Your father hid financial problems from me for years. He took loans in my name, opened credit cards, failed investments. There's proof, a letter from him." I prayed the truth would make her pause, but instead she let out a short, cutting laugh. "Oh my God, Mom, do you really think Dad did something like that? What are you talking about? You know how responsible he was." "I'm not making this up," I said quietly. "There's evidence. There are forged signatures." "Mom," Mia snapped, sharp enough to make me flinch. "You're grieving. I get it. But you can't talk about Dad like that. It's disrespectful." "I'm not disrespecting anyone." "You're being selfish," she pressed on, voice hardening. "Dad took care of this family. You know that. And now you're blaming him because you found something you don't understand? I don't believe you." It felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. "You think I'm lying?" "I think you're not well," Mia said, cold as glass. "You're hurting Dad's memory, and I don't want to hear it." Then she hung up. I stared at the blank screen for a long time before setting the phone down. Every bit of warmth drained from my body, leaving only cold space. My 2 children, the biggest parts of my life, didn't believe me, or rather, they refused to believe the truth. To them, Harold was still the perfect father, the steady figure they had admired their whole lives, and I was just a grieving woman imagining monsters out of grief. That night, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the living room window. I sat in the dark, no lights on, watching the streaks of water slide down the glass like cracks forming across the surface. The silence in the house made the rain louder, like the breathing of someone in pain. I thought of the look in Harold's eyes those last years. Sometimes he stared at me as if he wanted to confess something, but swallowed it instead. I once thought it was stress, work, age. Now I knew. It was fear. Fear of being found out. I thought about Justin, his strange calm, the way he defended Harold without hearing my full story. A faint instinct pushed me to replay the call in my mind. No, Justin wasn't indifferent. He was defensive. But why? For whom? And Mia's anger. I didn't blame her. Harold was her hero. He drove her to school every morning, helped her with math homework, held her every time she cried. The idea that Dad lied to us all was simply too heavy for her to bear. Sometimes the truth is too cruel for young people to accept. As for me, I had no choice. When I started to stand up, the phone rang again. I thought it was Justin or Mia calling back, but when I looked at the screen, I saw the words from West Shore Bank. Early foreclosure notice. Confirmation of enforcement. My hands went numb for a moment. I opened the message. It was a short summary. Because the loans had not been paid on time, the ones I never signed, the bank would begin foreclosure procedures within 30 days if there was no response. I exhaled a long breath that felt as if it dropped to the floor and shattered. Everything was falling apart too fast. No husband, no children who believe me, no home secured. I understood one thing with a clarity sharp enough to raise goosebumps. If I didn't save myself, no one else would. I stood up and turned on the living room light. The warm yellow glow fell over the metal box, waiting on the table, like a reminder that the path I needed to walk had only just begun. No matter how angry, how hurt, or how alone I felt, I had to stand firm, because if Harold had left me a battlefield, then I would fight until the very end to reclaim my own life. The next morning, I woke with the heavy sensation of someone who had climbed through a long, dark slope. The foreclosure notice sat on the kitchen table beside a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Everything felt like a warning that I no longer had time to hesitate. I needed someone on my side, someone who understood the law, someone who understood the kind of damage I was carrying. I remembered the advice of a neighbor who once went through a financial dispute with her ex-husband. She had mentioned a female attorney downtown in Portland, Rebecca Ortiz, a specialist in financial abuse within marriage. She said, "If anyone can help you, it's her." I took out the business card she had given me and dialed. The woman's voice on the other end was steady, quick, and sounded accustomed to dealing with clients on the verge of panic. She asked a few basic questions, then scheduled an appointment with me that very afternoon. I drove into downtown, misty rain speckling the windshield, heavy oak leaves drooping with water along the roadside. Portland in the rainy season always felt as if it collected the world's sadness and spread it across rooftops. But I couldn't take in the scenery anymore. All I knew was that I was searching for a final lifeline. The building where Rebecca worked had large glass panels and long steel lines, cold but strong. I stepped inside, hands wet from rain, feeling myself slowly descend into the white, chilled brightness of office hallways. At the reception area, a brown-skinned woman with neat curls and a black suit stood as I walked in. "Mrs. Holloway?" she asked. Her voice was warm but sharp, like a wire pulled just tight enough. "Yes," I answered. "I'm Rebecca Ortiz. Please come in." Her office had large windows overlooking the traffic below, and the late afternoon light filtered through the rain in blurred streaks. Rebecca gestured for me to sit, then pulled a small leather notebook from her drawer. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning to the end. Don't leave anything out." I nodded, then began speaking. My voice was weak and broken at first, but when I opened the folder of documents I brought, when the numbers, the signatures, and Harold's letter lay between us, the story poured out on its own. I told her about the mortgages, the forged credit cards, the failed investments, and finally the letter he left behind. Rebecca listened without blinking. She didn't show pity, didn't interrupt. When I finished, she set her pen down. "Evelyn," she said gently, "this is a very typical case of financial abuse in marriage. but its scale is greater than most I've seen. Abuse? I repeated, tilting my head slightly. The word tightened my chest. Yes, when a spouse secretly destroys the other's finances, steals their identity, creates debt behind their back, uses forged signatures, that is abuse. And your case is severe. I looked down at my hands. I didn't know anything. I lived with him for 35 years. Financial abusers are often excellent at hiding things, Rebecca said slowly. They don't need violence, they only need control of information. My throat grew hot. Harold hadn't just hidden things. He had stripped me of the right to know, the right to decide, the right to live freely. Rebecca continued, "You can win this, but we must prove you didn't sign any agreements, and we must prove you had no knowledge and that your signature was forged. I have bank records and Harold's letter." Rebecca nodded. "Good, but we need more. You'll have to gather receipts, statements, documents from the past 10 years, everything related to your family's finances." 10 years? The words chilled me. How could I possibly gather things Harold had controlled entirely? "Did Harold keep any notes?" she asked. "I haven't searched thoroughly," I said. "His office is still untouched." "Then start this evening," she replied. "Find anything that could serve as evidence. I'll send you a detailed list." I nodded, even as my heart pounded. I was afraid to return to that room, afraid of finding memories I once trusted now turned into masks. We talked for a while longer, and then I stood to leave, but Rebecca stopped me. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "this journey won't be short. It won't be easy. It will force you to face things even more painful than what you found in that box. You'll get angry, exhausted, maybe even want to quit." I met her eyes. "But I have to save my home, my name." "Not only that," Rebecca said, "you're saving the rest of your life, and you cannot collapse." I gripped the strap of my purse. "I have nothing left to lose." Rebecca nodded. "That is exactly when people become strongest." As I drove home, the rain grew heavier. Drops pounded the windshield, blurring everything as if the world outside were melting. Part of me wanted to drive fast and get home quickly. Another part wanted to turn the car around, leave Portland and start a new life in some small town. But I knew I couldn't. Not now. I parked under the porch and stepped inside, my heart heavy as lead. Harold's office was dark, the door cracked open as if inviting me, or daring me, to enter. I turned on the light. The smell of oak and old paper filled the room. Everything looked the same as before, but as I examined it carefully, I noticed something familiar. A brown leather notebook with a slightly peeling corner tucked in the bottom drawer. It hadn't been there the day before. Or perhaps I simply hadn't seen it. I opened it. Harold's handwriting. So familiar it made my heart jolt. But the content inside chilled me. Detailed notes, dates of loans, days of failed investments, amount lost, minimum payments. The first time he forged my signature. Each page was a knife. No apology, no explanation, just numbers. Written carefully like a private confession. I flipped to the last page. He had drawn a heavy line under a note. Contacted appraiser to sell Evelyn's mother's wedding ring. Not enough to cover payment. I froze. That ring. My mother wore it for 40 years before she died. I kept it as my most precious keepsake. I never imagined Harold would even touch it. But he had gone to get it appraised. He hadn't sold it, but he had considered it. The thought made my knees weak, but I didn't scream. I just stood there trembling. It took time before I could steady myself again. I knew I needed to gather everything. I needed to be stronger than the betrayal. I collected the notebook, stacked the documents in the box, clipped each file Rebecca required. When I walked out of the room, I felt as if I had aged years in one afternoon. But there was something else inside me, a faint spark, small but real. I was no longer standing in Harold's shadow. I was stepping out on my own, shaken, unsteady, but stepping forward regardless. And in that moment, I knew Rebecca was right. I had nothing left to lose. And when someone has hit rock bottom, there is only one direction left to go, upward. That evening, after gathering all the documents from Harold's office into a large box to bring to Rebecca the next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, preparing to send her a few scanned pages to review. But when I opened my computer, something felt off. A small email icon blinked in the corner. Not in my main inbox, but in an alternate account I had nearly forgotten existed. I froze. A strange unease crept into my chest. Harold had helped me set up that account years ago, saying it was for emergencies in case you lose your password. I had never used it since. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as if intuition itself were trying to stop me. But I opened it anyway. The inbox lit up. Time rolled back, and a single 6-month-old message appeared from an address I recognized immediately. Harold.Holloway, Archive G. Its subject line was only 3 words, for Evelyn only. My heart thumped hard once. Harold had never emailed me like that, certainly not to the account even I barely remembered. I clicked the message. Inside was a single attachment, red filed zip. I knew right away. I had found the red file Harold mentioned in his letter, the one he said would help me survive. I hesitated a moment, then opened it. A folder appeared containing nearly 20 PDFs, each numbered, and one final text file labeled, "Read this first." Text. I opened it. Just a few lines. Evelyn, if you are reading this, I no longer have the chance to fix the damage myself. You will be angry and you have every right. But if you want to prove your innocence, you must have evidence. This is everything. Harold. I went still. His tone wasn't like the man who wrote anniversary cards. It wasn't soft. It wasn't an attempt to ease my pain. It was a confession. Blunt and merciless. I opened the PDFs. The first file listed banks, the loan officers, dates signed, amounts, and scanned loan forms. I saw the forged signatures clearly. The curved strokes, the hesitant pressure. If someone else had forged my signature, it wouldn't have looked so perfect. But this was Harold, the man who saw my signature every day, who signed our house purchase 30 years ago next to mine. The second file listed every credit card he opened, all 18. Some used to pay short-term loans, others covering losses in investment accounts, some just making minimum payments before falling into debt. The third file held all of Harold's failed investments, each page marked with little handwritten notes he added before saving the documents. I thought this would save us. I just need more time. Can't let Evelyn know, she'll break. I was wrong. Each note pierced me. I didn't know what hurt more, his years of deception or the fact that he thought I was too weak to handle the truth. The fourth file made my breath catch. A list of every forged signature he had ever used for loans or cards. Next to each scan, Harold had written a single line. I committed a crime. I put a hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. Everything confirmed what Rebecca had said. This was financial abuse of the highest level. Then I opened the final file, a spreadsheet Harold titled, "Evidence Evelyn is Innocent." It listed every loan, every date, every forged signature, with notes. Evelyn did not know. Evelyn was not present. Evelyn did not sign. Evelyn received no benefit. My vision blurred. The cruel irony was that the man who destroyed me was also the one who left behind the only tools that could clear my name. Harold had made me a victim, but he had also left the key to escape the trap he built. I didn't know whether to thank him or curse him. The next morning, I brought everything to Rebecca. She opened each file, her expression shifting, from calm to serious to astonished. "Evelyn," she said slowly, "this red file is the strongest weapon you have. Not everyone who commits financial abuse leaves behind material like this. Harold didn't just admit fault, he documented every single unlawful act he committed." I lowered my head, rubbing my fingers together to steady myself. Rebecca leaned toward me. "With this, we won't just prove you're innocent. We can petition to void every loan, wipe out all credit card debt, and restore your financial standing. Courts take self-incriminating records like this very seriously." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "But Evelyn," Becca continued, "the red file tells us something else. Are you certain Harold did all of this alone?" I looked up. "What do you mean?" She turned the monitor toward me. "Some transactions show a secondary name or someone Harold asked to open temporary accounts. That name is redacted in the bank copies you brought. But in the red file, Harold wrote one line." She zoomed in. A small note at the bottom of the page. "Jay knows about this. I promised him it was a sure win investment. He shouldn't have been dragged in." My head rang. Jay. Just one letter. But I knew. I knew without thinking. Justin. As I reread the note, a memory flickered from the day before. Justin's strange calmness. The way he grew defensive when Harold came up. The way he avoided my eyes when I asked questions. My hands shook. "Rebecca, what do you think Justin knew?" "I can't conclude anything," she said. "But Harold recorded that your son participated in at least part of this process. Maybe he was persuaded. Maybe he thought he was helping temporarily. Maybe he didn't know how serious it was." I held my head in my hands. "Oh God, Justin." Rebecca softened her voice. "You need to talk to him. But be careful. When people fear being implicated, they often lie." I nodded, unsure if I had enough breath left to speak a single word. That evening, while I was sitting at my desk, Justin suddenly appeared at my door. He didn't call first, didn't warn me. He just stood there, tense-faced, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. "Mom," he said, eyes flicking toward the box of files on my table. "I heard you're investigating something. I need to know what you found." I looked at my son for a long moment, noticing the way he avoided eye contact, the slight lean of someone preparing to defend himself. In that instant, I knew Justin had known more than he'd ever said. He had known for a long time, and I knew this too. The truth between us was no longer a bridge. It was a wall I would have to break, no matter the cost. Justin stood in the doorway, hands shoved deeper into his pockets, shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. I opened the door wider, giving him space to come in, but he stayed right at the threshold, not entering, not leaving. He scanned the house, the home once filled with family laughter. Then his eyes settled on the box of documents. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, voice rough. I nodded and stepped aside. Justin walked in but didn't sit. He stood beside the table, the light hitting his face in a way that made his eyes darker, more tired. "I heard from Mia that you're digging up Dad's business," Justin began. I let out a slow breath. "It's not digging. It's the truth. A truth I didn't choose, but one I have to face." Justin bit his lip, inhaling as if bracing himself. "Dad, once asked me to put my name on a loan," he admitted, staring at the wooden floor instead of me. I blinked. "When?" "3 years ago." Justin stepped back slightly. "Dad told me his small company hit a temporary snag. He said he just needed my name for a little while, that it wouldn't affect anything. No one would know. He needed a trustworthy signature." My knees weakened. "Did you sign it?" "No." Justin shook his head quickly. I refused. "But I didn't tell you. I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want you to ask why Dad needed my help for a big loan. I didn't want more tension in the family." He finally looked up. "I thought Dad was just having a small problem. I didn't know it was this big." I realized Justin didn't hide the truth just because of fear of Harold. He hid it because he was afraid to face the possibility that the father he idolized could do something wrong. "You know, Justin," I said softly, but my voice didn't shake anymore. "I'm not angry at you for not telling me sooner. I'm angry that you still don't believe me, even when the truth is sitting right here." Justin clenched his fists. "Mom, I don't know what to believe. I grew up seeing Dad as strong, dependable, the man who always fixed everything. To me, he could never be wrong." "And that's the problem," I replied. "Because you believed he was perfect. You dismissed every piece of evidence, even when it was staring you in the face." Justin went silent, and I saw it. A quiet collapse inside him, like stone cracking from within. No noise, no drama, but real. That collapse never reached Mia. If Justin had at least listened, Mia chose the opposite path entirely. 3 days after my talk with Justin, she called, her voice sharp as a blade. "Mom, I don't want to hear any more of you slandering Dad. I'm sending back the things you gave me." Before I could explain, she hung up. That evening, just as I was about to lock the door, I heard a car brake hard outside. Mia stepped out, her coat whipping in the cold wind. She didn't knock, didn't greet me, didn't even look at me. She walked straight to the porch and threw the stack of documents onto the steps like something filthy. Papers scattered across the damp concrete. "If you want to destroy the image of Dad, go ahead," she spat. "But don't drag me into it." I bent down to gather the pages, my fingers freezing. "Mia, I sent them so you'd know the truth, not to make you hate your father. I never wanted that." "But that's exactly what you're doing," Mia shouted, tears spilling, though she backed away as if afraid I'd touch her. "Dad can't defend himself anymore, and you're turning him into a monster. I won't accept it." She turned, climbed into her car, and slammed the door so hard it felt like the sound hit me in the chest. When she sped off, I stood alone in the entryway, Portland wind cutting cold around me, papers scattered at my feet. I didn't pick them up right away. I watched the road in the direction Mia had driven, feeling emptiness expand inside me. My 2 children, the people I carried, raised, and loved through most of my life, were fighting me. Not out of malice, but because the truth was too big for them to face. I wasn't angry at them. I was devastated that Harold had made me the bearer of the bad news, the one forced to shatter the illusion he'd built in their minds. When I told Rebecca everything at our next meeting, she stayed silent for a long moment, then said, "Evelyn, truth always comes with a cost, and you're paying with the fracture of your family." I looked down at my hands. I don't want to lose my children, but I also can't let myself be dragged down by Harold's mistakes. "You're not doing anything wrong," Rebecca said firmly. "You're stepping out of the darkness he created." I gave a weak smile. "But my children, they're still standing inside that darkness." "They'll step out eventually," Rebecca said, "but not today, and you must keep going, even if you have to walk alone." I nodded, feeling, for the first time in months, a small, steady ground under my feet. "I'll keep going," I said. Rebecca nodded. "You must keep going." That night, when I came home, I turned on every light in the living room. Warm yellow light washed over the piles of documents, over Harold's deposit box, over the scratches on the floor where Mia had thrown the papers. I stood in the center of the room for a long time. I had lost Harold, in every sense. I was losing my children, in the most painful way. I was losing my home, unless I fought for myself. But I realized something else. I had never stood for myself before, never fought for myself, never allowed myself to be the one steering my own life. And if everything I was losing now was the price of finally finding myself, maybe it was a price I could accept. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and placed them on the table. Then I opened my computer, pulled up the red file, and emailed Rebecca the additional documents she needed. When I clicked send, I knew I had taken a step Harold never imagined I could take, a step out of his shadow, a step towards saving my own life. Even though no one else was in the house, I still said it out loud, "I'll see this through." The next morning, when Rebecca emailed to inform me the financial abuse petition had been officially filed with the court, I stood frozen in front of the screen, as if I had just heard someone declare the beginning of a war. No turning back, no waiting for Harold to return and explain everything, no hoping it would somehow go away. I stepped onto the porch and breathed in Portland's sharp, wet air. Wind rustled through the oak leaves in the yard, carrying the smell of damp wood. The sky was heavy and gray, but something small and solid had taken shape inside me. Not peace, but resolve. About an hour later, Rebecca called. "Evelyn," the bank responded. Her voice dropped half a tone, and I tightened my grip on the phone. "What did they say?" "They claim you benefited from the marriage, so you're responsible for the loans he took out while married to you." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Benefited? I'm facing foreclosure. How exactly did I benefit?" Rebecca sighed. "That's how banks operate. They cling to the concept of marital assets and push liability onto the surviving spouse. But we have the red file. We have forged signatures, we have transaction histories, and we have Harold's confessional record." I sat down at the old wooden kitchen chair. The house was so quiet I could hear every tick of the wall clock. "Are you ready for this stage?" Rebecca asked. I nodded, though she couldn't see. "I don't have any other choice." 2 weeks later, the real battle began. Rebecca hired a handwriting expert who once worked for the FBI, a tall, thin man with silver hair and eyes sharp as metal. He arrived with a large case full of scanning equipment, magnifiers, and comparison software. "I'll need every genuine signature you've written in the last 15 years, he said. I dug through everything. Library cards, hospital registration forms, volunteer certifications at the community center, even Christmas cards I'd signed for neighbors. Harold had always told me not to worry about paperwork, so my authentic signatures weren't as numerous as his. As the expert compared them, I stood beside him, feeling my chest tighten with every breath. He ran a magnifier across the curves of each real signature and said clearly, "Your real signature is steady, downward strokes even, spacing consistent." Then he opened the documents Harold used to obtain loans. It felt like someone was peeling skin from my wrist, slowly, deliberately. "This signature is not yours," he said, marking it. "This one isn't either. Different pen pressure. The pen movement is completely different. This is sophisticated forgery, but still forgery. He worked for 4 straight hours without taking a break. By the end, he stacked all the documents into 2 piles. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said, "92% of the signatures in the bank files are not yours. I'll prepare a detailed report with technical analysis for the court." I looked at the 2 piles, feeling my eyes sting. One pile held the real signatures, few, simple, scarce. The other held the forged ones, identical to mine in a way that chilled me. All of them had been used by the man I once trusted completely. I felt both pain and relief. Relief because the truth had been confirmed by an expert. Pain because Harold had practiced my signature until he mastered it, which meant he forged me, not once, but many times. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. He shook his head. "You're stronger than most people I've met." I couldn't tell whether it was a compliment or condolences, but the bank didn't stay quiet. 3 days later, I received a large envelope. No logo, no sender name. Inside was a typed letter. "Mrs. Holloway, we warn you to stop spreading false accusations and distorting financial records. This behavior indicates signs of collusion and intentional evasion of responsibility." I read it once, then again. I let out a laugh with no joy at all. Collusion, evasion. I was the only person in the house who hadn't signed a single thing. But to them, I was the easiest target to push around. An older widow who didn't know the law, who had no one to protect her. They had no idea I had found myself in this battle. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Rebecca. Just minutes later, she called me. "Evelyn, this is intimidation. We'll strike back. The red file will be the centerpiece. The bank can't deny the existence of documents Harold left behind." "What do you want me to do?" "Keep every piece of correspondence and prepare yourself. The first court date is coming." I began to change myself quietly. I was no longer the woman who waited for Harold to bring home the money, waited for him to explain the finances, believed blindly that he was always right. I started reading every line of law Rebecca sent me. I learned to interpret legal terms. I tagged documents with color tabs. I printed files, arranged them by timeline, and noted every loan and every forged signature. Each morning, I made coffee, opened the documents, and worked as if everything depended on me, because it did. Every afternoon made me feel 10 years older, but I also felt something else. I was steadier than I had ever been. No more trembling at Harold's name. No more fear of what my children thought. No more feeling like a passive bystander in my own life. Sometimes I looked in the mirror and saw the woman I was at 35, when Harold first brought me to this house, but her eyes were different now, lined with age, touched by pain, yet still burning with fire. The court date was set. Rebecca sent a short text. "March 17th, be ready." I sat down, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from knowing I was standing at the biggest crossroads of my life. That night, as I turned off the living room lights and prepared for bed, my computer chimed with a new email. I opened it. An anonymous message. No subject, no signature. "Stop, you will regret this." Below it, a single line. This wasn't just Harold. I froze, my heart pounding. Not Harold? Not only Harold? And someone out there didn't want me to continue. I stared at the screen until the blue glow stung my eyes. But instead of frightening me, the message fueled something I had been building day by day. Anger. Stubbornness. The determination of a woman who had been pushed to the bottom and feared nothing anymore. I closed the laptop, stood up, and whispered firmly, "I'm not stopping, whoever you are." On the morning of the hearing, I woke before the alarm could ring. Dim Portland lights seeped through the curtains, covering the room in the somber gray of March. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle over my shoulders. More than a year of gathering evidence, confronting my children, fighting the bank. All of it led to this moment. I put on the navy coat Rebecca recommended, tied my hair back, and studied myself in the mirror a little longer than usual. The woman looking back had a face marked by experience, eyes no longer trembling, though not entirely hardened. Something soft remained, perhaps regret. Regret for a 35-year marriage, regret for children forced to see a new picture of the father they loved. I left the house early. A light rain fell. Drops hit the windshield like suspended punctuation marks in an unfinished story. The courthouse parking lot was crowded, more than I expected. Financial cases always drew quiet, watchful attention. Before I could enter the building, I saw Justin standing in the hallway. Gray shirt, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. His face looked exhausted, but when he noticed me, he straightened a little. "Mom," he said softly. I nodded. "Thank you for coming." He opened his mouth to speak, but the click of heels echoed behind him. Mia appeared, more makeup than usual, but eyes swollen, as if from sleepless nights. She avoided my gaze. "I just want to see how this ends," she said. That was all. But it was the closest she had come to me since everything began. The courtroom was packed. 2 rows of benches, every seat filled, whispers floating in the air as Rebecca, her team, and I entered. It felt like stepping onto a stage, except the lights were cold fluorescent bulbs, not warm amber lamps. Across the aisle, the bank representatives sat stiffly, faces carved from stone, a cluster of polished lawyers, each with a laptop, each with eyes sharp as blades. They didn't look at me like a victim. They looked at me like a threat. The judge entered. The gavel struck. The hearing officially began. The bank's attorney opened with predictable words. "Your Honor, under Oregon law, marriage constitutes a financial community. Therefore, Mrs. Evelyn Holloway is legally responsible for all loans and debts incurred during the marriage, regardless of who signed." He recited the lines without emotion, formulas instead of arguments, but each word pierced me like a pin. He continued. Furthermore, there is no evidence that Mrs. Holloway was entirely unaware of these transactions. We suspect implicit consent, perhaps even collusion. I heard a faint hiss behind me, Mia whispering, "They're accusing Mom." Rebecca rose, tapping the table lightly before stepping forward. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "the bank relies on the concept of marital assets, but they purposely ignore the nature of this case, financial abuse within a marriage, and we have evidence." She signaled to the technician. A large screen lit up. "We present an audio recording of Harold Holloway, now deceased, speaking with his private attorney 6 months before his death. In it, he explicitly asks about the legal risks of using his wife's forged signature to obtain loans." A shockwave rippled through the room. I glanced at Justin. His face had gone pale. Mia raised a trembling hand to her mouth. The recording played. Harold's voice filled the courtroom, low, strained. "If, hypothetically, I used my wife's signature, would the court see that as fraud?" His attorney's voice replied, "Absolutely fraud, and if she proves it, the bank bears the loss, not her." Harold again, voice shaking. "I just wanted more time. I didn't want her to know." Someone behind me let out a broken sound, maybe a stranger overwhelmed. My fingers tightened until my knuckles whitened. The judge nodded slowly. When it was my turn to testify, my legs felt like stone, But when I set my hand on the wooden rail, a strange calm washed over me, as if I finally knew exactly what needed to be said. "Mrs. Holloway," the judge said, "please describe your marriage and why you claim you knew nothing about the loans." I looked at him, then at the room. I saw Justin wiping his eyes. I saw Mia caught between disbelief and heartbreak, and I began. I trusted my husband for 35 years. I trusted him so completely that I never opened a single financial file, never logged into the bank account, never asked why. I thought that was trust. But now, I know I misunderstood. I paused. Trust is not consent to betrayal. A small sob broke from somewhere behind me. Justin covered his face with his sleeve, shoulders shaking. I spoke of the hidden papers, the Monday bank trips, the times Harold told me, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." I told them about the foreclosure notice, the moment my world collapsed because of the man I loved, not as a plea, not as a lament, as the truth. Rebecca presented the red file. She laid each document before the court. Real and forged signatures, Harold's handwritten confessions, his failed investments, and the ledger of deception he left behind. Mia stood abruptly, her eyes shattered. "Mom was telling the truth," she whispered. Dad did all of this." I wanted to hold her, but she sat back down, trembling. After nearly 3 hours, the judge rose, gathering the documents. The court has reviewed the evidence, testimony, and the self-recorded admissions of the late Mr. Harold Holloway. This court finds Mrs. Evelyn Holloway bears no legal or personal responsibility for the loans. My heartbeat slowed to a steady, heavy thud. All mortgages, credit debt, and financial obligations resulting from forged signatures are hereby voided. I closed my eyes. The property, including the house, is fully restored to Mrs. Evelyn Holloway. I exhaled a breath I felt I'd been holding for years. Rebecca placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it." I turned and saw Justin rise, his face wet with tears. Mia was crying too, but her eyes now held no doubt, only sorrow, only understanding. I stepped outside the courtroom. The sunlight was brighter than I remembered. I stood on the stone steps as my children approached slowly. They didn't speak. They didn't hug me. They didn't apologize. They just stood beside me. Two silhouettes struggling to rebuild their understanding of the world. I had won, but I had also lost a part of my family, because sometimes the truth is more merciless than anything I ever imagined. I gripped my bag strap, lifted my chin, and walked down the steps carrying both the victory and the ache that had no name. That afternoon, after the hearing, I returned to my home, the home that had nearly been swallowed by a whirlwind of debts I never created. When I opened the door, I felt the familiar quiet, but it no longer pressed on my chest the way it used to. The late sunlight slipped through the curtains, bathing the room in a warm, golden hue. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without pain tightening in my chest. I made myself a cup of herbal tea, set it on the table, and settled into the old armchair. I thought I would sit there for a long while, letting my body and mind slowly recognize that I had truly climbed out of the abyss. But not even 5 minutes passed before the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a neighbor checking in, or perhaps Rebecca stopping by. But when I opened the door, I saw Mia standing there. She was still wearing the outfit she'd had on at the hearing. Her eyes were red, her nose flushed, mascara smudged faintly down her cheeks. The evening wind tossed her hair, and she held her purse tightly to her chest, as if she were afraid something inside might break. "Mom!" Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. I stood still. I didn't know how long I'd been waiting for those words. Maybe since the day Harold died, maybe since the moment I discovered everything, or maybe since the night Mia threw the documents onto the steps and walked away without looking back. Mia stepped inside, automatically closing the door behind her. Then she broke down. Not the restrained, angry crying I had seen before, but the way a child cries, like the little girl she once was at 6 years old, who would run home whenever thunder scared her. I trusted Dad so blindly, she sobbed. I never thought he would do something like that to you. I thought you were trying to ruin his name. I was wrong. I was terribly wrong. I placed my hand on her shoulder. She collapsed into my arms as if she had been waiting months for someone to hold her again. I stroked her hair, feeling her body tremble against me. "It's all right," I whispered, even though my heart was breaking with each tear she shed. "You trusted your father because you loved him. I never blamed you for that." "But it must have hurt you so much," Mia cried. "You faced all of this alone, and I turned my back on you." I didn't deny it. I didn't want to revisit it. Holding her in my arms, I realized forgiveness isn't erasing the pain. It's allowing both of us to walk forward without being chained to what happened. An hour later, Justin arrived. He stood at the door looking uneasy, holding a thin stack of papers. When he saw Mia sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea and red eyes, he flinched slightly. Then he sat next to her and turned to me. "Mom," Justin said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart tightened. "Last year, Dad sent me some documents." Justin placed the papers on the table. "He asked me to keep them because you didn't need the stress. I read them, but I didn't understand everything. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to tell you." He lowered his head. "I didn't want to upset you. I didn't want to confront Dad. I didn't want to break the image I believed in my whole life." I opened the papers. Just as Justin said, copies of old loan forms, notes Harold had written about risk, late payments, waiting until next week to fix it. Every line was a warning sign that Justin had been too young, too unprepared to face at the time. I exhaled, placing my hand over his. "You were wrong," I said gently but honestly, "but you came here to say it, and that means a great deal." Justin looked up, eyes wet, but clearer than I'd seen in a long time. "I'm sorry, Mom." For the first time in months, the three of us sat together, not as fractured pieces of a broken family, but as people trying to find their way back to one another. I made more tea, set out a plate of biscuits, and in that small kitchen, once filled with cold silence, the air warmed bit by bit. No one spoke much, but the silence wasn't sharp anymore. It felt like the warmth from an old heater, soft, steady, slowly thawing places in our hearts that had been cold for too long. I said, "Your father wasn't a monster." I looked at Justin, then Mia, but he wasn't a saint either. Mia lowered her head. Justin nodded slowly. Both of them understood now. A person can love deeply and still cause deep harm. And sometimes those left behind must learn to hold both truths at once. We talked until dusk, not about debts or lawsuits, but about good memories. Beach trips, Christmas dinners, nights when Harold told them old stories. No one tried to deny he had hurt me, but no one denied he had loved us in his own flawed way, either. My family, though scarred, was finding its way back. A few weeks later, I started working at Helen's Book Nook. Helen, the woman who had encouraged me throughout the ordeal, stood behind the counter with her warm smile and those sharp eyes that always seemed to understand more than she said. "I knew you'd come," she said when I asked for a job. I laughed. "Helen, you didn't know that." "No," she tilted her head, "but I know someone who survives a storm often wants to stand again and do something meaningful." Helen taught me how to shelve books by theme, how to recommend the right story to the right reader, how to recognize someone searching for a book to fill an empty place inside. One afternoon, while I was labeling new arrivals, Helen walked up to me. "Evelyn," she asked, "what did you learn from everything you've been through?" I set down the novel and thought for a moment. "I learned," I said slowly, "that I'm not as weak as I thought, and I'm not strong in the way I expected either. I just survived, and from that, I learned how to live again." Helen smiled. "That's resilience." I realized then that every woman who walked into this shop carried her own story, and I, with all the ruin Harold left behind, could now understand them in a way I never could before. I wasn't just standing up again. I was being reborn. That evening, when I locked the shop and stepped outside, the sky was turning a soft shade of purple. I looked up and suddenly understood something clearly. Harold left me in ashes, but I rebuilt my life from those ashes, and the rest of my life, for the first time in a very long time, belonged entirely to me. After that night when my children and I finally sat together again, my life found a new rhythm, slow, gentle, but fully within my control. I still work 3 days a week at Helen's shop. I loved opening the door in the early morning, the scent of old books mixing with the coffee brewing behind the counter, the soft chime of the wind bell whenever a customer walked in. It was a kind of peace I never knew I needed so much. But the ordinary days in the shop began to change when I noticed certain eyes, not those of people searching for a good novel, but eyes filled with hesitation, worry, sometimes fear, hidden behind polite smiles. The first was a woman around 50. She lingered in the self-help aisle, fingers brushing the spine of a book about financial independence without opening it. She looked at me, took a breath, and asked softly, "You're Evelyn, right? You went through what they wrote in the interview Helen posted on the board?" I nodded. She bit her lip. "I think something is wrong in my home, too, but I don't know where to start." We sat in the reading nook. She told her story in fragments. Her husband controlled all bank accounts, gave her money only in small amounts, told her she couldn't handle numbers, sometimes pressured her to sign papers she wasn't allowed to read. Each detail felt like I was listening to my own past self, the woman who thought ignorance would keep her life peaceful. I gave her a few resources, showed her how to check her credit, urged her to speak with a lawyer. When she left, her hands were no longer shaking. I thought she was an exception. She wasn't. Within weeks, 5 women sought me out, all unsure, all anxious, all unaware they were experiencing financial abuse. Helen saw what was happening even before I did. One afternoon, she placed a hand on my shoulder while I was reorganizing the book display. "Evelyn," she said, "if this keeps happening, you need a space for them, not the checkout counter." I looked at her, not fully understanding yet. "You mean a support group?" Helen nodded, smiling gently. "A small one, led by someone who's walked through it. They trust you." The idea made me nervous. I'd never led anything, certainly not a group built on vulnerability and pain. But that night, as I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once shaken opening envelopes from the bank, I realized something. I had walked through hell, and I didn't want anyone else to walk through it alone. So the first support group met in the little storage room behind the shop. surrounded by towers of old books. The first night, only 3 women came. They held their cups of tea tightly, as if afraid hope might spill out. I began with my own story, not shaking like in the courtroom, not choking with grief, just telling it, honestly, plainly, without bitterness. When I finished, one woman burst into tears. Another squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you. I finally feel like I'm not crazy." The group didn't stay at 3. Week 2, 6 women. Week 4, 10. By the second month, we didn't have enough chairs. There was a retired teacher, an online shop owner, a young woman married only 2 years, but already denied access to her own bank account. All different, yet all shaped by the same sentence from a man in their lives: "Let me handle everything." I didn't give advice quickly. I let them hear themselves speak, because that's the first step to believing their own truth. One evening, we helped a woman named Clarissa. Her husband had opened 11 credit lines under her name. She was the shyest of all, always sitting at the edge of her chair, hands twisting, voice trembling. Rebecca agreed to advise her, and in 4 weeks, Clarissa had 3 loans dismissed. When she brought the news, her whole body shook as she said, "I thought my life would end because of that debt, but there's a way out." We clapped like children receiving gifts. Watching her smile through tears, I felt something shift inside me, something warm and fierce. That night, Helen came in with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Do you understand, Evelyn?" she asked. "You're turning pain into a legacy of healing." I had never thought of it like that, but hearing her say it, I felt its truth in my bones. All the nights crying alone, all the shame, all the fear that the world believed I was a liar. Those experiences had carved a path I never expected to walk, a path where I wasn't the wounded one. I was the guide. I started changing. I walked with straighter shoulders. I spoke calmly but firmly. I stopped fearing phone calls or letters. I learned not only to protect myself, but to teach others to protect themselves. When the group reached over 20 members, I created a small fund to help women afford legal fees. I named it Second Light, because the second light in life doesn't come from anyone else. It comes from within, when a person finally steps out of the dark. Helen hugged me when I announced it. "Evelyn," she said proudly, "you didn't just rebuild, you're helping others rebuild too." I looked at my hands, the same hands that once trembled, holding Harold's forged documents, the same hands that once shook signing paperwork just to survive. Now they were steady. They no longer belonged to a deceived wife. They belonged to a woman who had risen again, and I knew the journey Harold forced me into, however cruelly, had brought me to where I was always meant to be. In the middle of my life, I had found myself again, and from myself, I found a way to light the path for others still lost in the shadows of betrayal. 1 year after Harold's death, I stood again before the glass doors of a bank, but not West Shore, where I used to walk in trembling, afraid one more breath would make my world collapse. This was a different bank entirely, bright, modern, free of any memory tied to the days when I was dragged toward ruin. I paused for a few seconds, straightened my collar, and took a deep breath. I was no longer walking in with the legs of a wounded woman. I walked in as a survivor. The teller smiled warmly. I returned a soft smile, the kind I never thought I could make again after everything I'd endured. "I'd like to open a new account," I said, "in my name only." No one else added, no shared access, no more allowing anyone to exploit, forge, or hide behind my life. The teller typed my information and asked how I wanted my name to appear. I lifted my head and looked straight at the screen. Evelyn Holloway Reyes, I pronounced clearly, each syllable closing an old door and opening a new one. Reyes, the hyphenated name I had always loved when I was young, before I chose to set it aside to become Harold Holloway's wife. I had spent too many years living under a name someone else chose for me. When the new account card was placed into my hand, something in my chest loosened, not with sadness, but with a strange, quiet peace. I pictured the months I had survived, the financial shocks, the forged documents, the nights I sat in the dark afraid to turn on the light, the legal battle that drained me, the countless tears I shed. And the moment I stood before the judge and said that trust is not the same as agreeing to be betrayed. I once thought I would never rise above any of it. Yet here I was, signing for a new account, a new life, with a new name that belonged entirely to me. I walked out of the bank. The afternoon light poured across the sidewalk, and I felt warmth spreading through my chest. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of traffic, the sound of voices, the soft rustle of leaves brushing against each other. Everything around me carried on as if it were an ordinary day. But to me, this was a turning point. I was no longer the woman who let Harold decide everything for 35 years of marriage. I no longer lived in anyone's shadow. I no longer searched for excuses to forgive the unforgivable. I had become the woman I was meant to be long ago. When I returned to the bookshop, Helen was sitting behind the counter reading a newspaper. She looked up and smiled as if she already knew what had happened. "Evelyn," she said, "you look different." "Different how?" I asked, though I felt the difference myself. "Like someone who just cut off an invisible chain," Helen replied. "Lighter, freer." I laughed, a sound I once believed I had lost. That evening, when the support group gathered in the storage room, I told them about the new account, the new name, the feeling of taking back my own life. No one applauded loudly, but the women sitting closest reached out and gently squeezed my hand. The kind of squeeze shared by people who understand one another through pain endured and strength rediscovered. I looked around the small room glowing under warm yellow light. Every face carried its own wounds, but the eyes were brighter than when they had first walked through the door. I thought of Clarissa, who had escaped the debt her husband created in her name. I thought of the young woman who cried after discovering her husband secretly transferred money into private accounts. I thought of the women who would come here in the future, carrying the same question I once carried: am I crazy for doubting the person I love? I knew the answer now, and I was ready to give it to them. After the meeting ended, I watched the women walk out, clutching their coats, standing straighter, stepping with more confidence. A profound warmth spread through me, a feeling I'd never imagined I would experience, the feeling of belonging to myself. When I locked the shop and paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the darkening sky, I realized that this journey, though full of pain, had brought me exactly where I needed to be. I had endured betrayal, loss, humiliation, suspicion, and even the heartbreak of my own children turning away. I had stood before a judge, before a banking system, before the memory of the man I once believed was my lifelong anchor. I had lost so much, but in the end I found myself again, and that was the greatest victory. As I walked toward my car, I thought of the people reading or listening to this story. Maybe they are carrying doubts they're afraid to admit. Maybe they are in a marriage where silence is being used to hide something. Maybe they fear the truth because they believe the truth will destroy their lives. But I am living proof of this. The truth may hurt you, but lies will kill you slowly. If something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Don't let love blind you to reality. Don't let your sacrifices become a weapon someone else uses to control or destroy your future. And above all, remember that there is always a way out, always a second light, just as I found mine. Before we part, I want to leave you, the person reading or listening, with a message from my heart. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for taking the time to hear my journey. If you've ever faced similar pain, I hope my story can be a small lantern so you don't feel alone. Where are you watching from? Which state or which corner of the world? Share it with me in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and stay for the next one. I'm grateful for every one of you walking this path with me, because you too are part of the light that helps me continue telling my story.